Hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hey, now we are live. What is this? Rewards enabled? Oh, that's a promotional thing. Okay. Well, that's more for other people than for me. All right, let me just put out the general disclaimer here. Oh, I shouldn't have... Alright. I can fix that. That's easy to fix. Okay. Did I... Oh, here it is. I see. Okay. Alright. Alright, and that will be manually or at end of stream. Okay, so, alright, welcome in. Welcome to today's stream. It is going to be, we're going to read the Fellowship of the Ring. I'm just getting all my ducks in a row and sort of just letting people know what's going on here. Oh, let's try posting that in the correct place. I wonder why it looks so strange today. Yeah, it's like a different style of link. I mean, I suppose it doesn't matter, but... Hello, Moogle. How's it going? How are you doing today? Just sort of... you're the first moderator here, so I'm sure you see the pinned message. Just make sure anybody, cusses or anything. You don't need to, ban anybody or time anybody out. All you gotta do is just... Oh, no, I screwed that up. Just delete it. Only if it becomes habitual. And of course, it's just for today, just because I want to put these on the YouTube channel later on. I don't know. Okay. Oh, you know what? I should. Yeah, well, you could just hit dismiss on that rewards thing. That's just a promotional thing, letting people know that there's like a reward system in place for things like subscriptions and everything, because it was blocking it for me too, but I kind of defeats the purpose of having a pinned message to the chat when there's a promotional thing that pops up over it. But I think I'm going to post on Facebook and everything, but I think what I should do here is perhaps send a message to Laurel, because I know she doesn't like missing these streams, so Facebook doesn't always let people know right away. Yeah, all you gotta do is click on that message and hit dismiss, and it'll go away on your end. We are in the Hobbit hole. We're coming out of Bag End. Yeah, Bag End. It's a really good render of Bag End. I think it's related to. It's not from one of the video games, but it's related to one of the video games. It's a concept art. I don't know. I have it written down where it comes from, so I could, attribute the artist properly, but I don't know it off the top of my head. So, yeah, today, the Fellowship of the Ring, being the first part of the Lord of the Rings, exciting stuff. Last time, I was so perturbed in a way, because we got through the forward, and the prologue, and exactly 2 chapters. We didn't get very far. But it's, you know what it is, the second chapter, A Shadow of the Past, is quite long. Because there really is no rule in literature as to how much a chapter should be. This little bit here, this is what we got through. So it took us 4 streams to get through The Hobbit. I would say this is probably going to be 6 for the Fellowship of the Ring. It is the longest part of the 3 books that make up the Lord of the Rings. The Two Towers and the Return of the King are shorter. Well, actually, the Return of the King is gigantic, but a bunch of it at the end is the appendices. And I guess I will read the appendices because there's a lot of important stuff in there that we could go over, So I guess the Return of the King is longer in that sense. But it's denser. The text is not as big, and it's just if The Hobbit is a children's book, which it really is in a sense, that it or as Tolkien would say, it's a tale suitable for children, then the Lord of the Rings is what we would refer to today as young adult. Or I should say a tale suitable for young adults. Although I read it when I was, let's see, how old was I? I think I was about 11 years old when I first read The Lord of the Rings. I think. I was 8 when I read The Hobbit for the first time, but The Lord of the Rings was a bit later. I think I was around 10 or 11 years old, somewhere around there, 1990 or 1991. The thing is, I'm trying to think of where was it that I lived when I read The Fellowship of the Ring, and it's difficult to think of because I associate reading The Fellowship of the Ring, for the first time at least, with my grandmother's place. Not, I think it was over the summer, and I just remember that bedroom that I had at my because when I was a kid, we would spend summers, me and my sister, at my grandparents had a place in upstate New York, and we would spend the summer there, basically after school was over, we'd have maybe a few days, and then we'd be driven up there and stay there until just basically right before school would start. You read The Hobbit on an airplane. Okay. Well, I guess you sort of read The Hobbit on my streams, right? It was like an audiobook. I mean, audiobooks don't stop to analyze the text, but, I got a lot of cool feedback from the last stream. I'm going to bring that up, actually. We had a lot of cool comments about the first reading once it went up on YouTube. Let me bring that up here. No, I want comments. I don't want to edit it. Now this is showing there being... Oh, that's not the right video. That's why. That's wrong. Here it is. I found it. So let me just bring this up. So just going to read a handful of these comments. I don't know, maybe all of them. There's a lot of comments here, but, just to address the feedback from the last time we read The Lord of the Rings. Christian Reinhold wrote, "Great stuff. Looking forward to the next installment." So, and I let him know that it will be live on Twitch on the 17th, and then it will be on here afterwards. So, Christian, I don't know if you're in the chat, or if you're going to be in the chat, or whatever, if you're looking, but hopefully you get to see this. Hold on 1 second. Let's see. Oh, I lost the thing. Oh, here it is. Okay. And let's see. Then we had... well, this was a question that was posted on the VOD, and that I thought I would answer here. I already answered it in the comment section, but I'll address it here. This is from Literate Varmint 3838, who said, "Why did Tolkien choose the title The Lord of the Rings? Is it possible that the title is subtly referring to Frodo? Pippin calls Frodo Lord of the Ring in many meetings." That's a chapter that we haven't gotten to yet. Though Gandalf corrects him. Frodo often strikes me as a metaphor for Christ. Well, he's not. I just want to cut and say he's not. Who takes all the evil of the world onto himself and becomes the King of Kings by renouncing power and sacrificing himself. Frodo does in this way become Lord of the Rings, not just in the way that Sauron would understand it. It would be strange to name the book after Sauron, who is never portrayed as a character during the events of the book. That is true. And whose actions are only seen in their effects. The story is just not about him. And what I explained is that, the book, The Lord of the Rings, is intended to be Frodo's memoir, not just Frodo's memoir, Sam's as well, and to a certain extent even Merry and Pippin. And then the characters that once everything splits, starting with the Two Towers, and you start having these sections that follow Frodo and Sam, and then you have these sections that follow Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas, and then you have sections that follow Merry and Pippin. So there's not a section in any of the books that follows Sauron, but it was all written down by Frodo and Sam and compiled in a big book along with Bilbo's memoirs, and they entitled their section "The Downfall of the Lord of the Rings and the Return of the King." So when you say the Lord of the Rings, it's a shortened form of that. The downfall of the Lord of the Rings and the return of the King. Dracula, really? See, now that's interesting because Dracula is one of my favorite novels of all time. And obviously I'm doing the J.R.R. Tolkien channel, and a Dracula reading would not fit in with that. But that's not to say that that's an attractive prospect. I do have a pretty nice hardcover of Dracula. I even have a graphic novel and everything. I'm a big Dracula fan, as you know. Maybe Moogle. That's not a bad idea. Just for funsies. Hey, Gray with the watch trick. Okay, we got this guy's axe, this guy's bow, and I think someone misplaced their anti-vampire whip. Thank you, Gray. But yeah, the reason that the book is called The Lord of the Rings is in part a short form of the downfall of the Lord of the Rings, but also out of universe. You have to understand that marketing-wise, this is a sequel to The Hobbit. The Hobbit was this huge, successful thing. It was so successful, it did really big numbers in the 30s and 40s. And then, it's the 50s now, and here comes the sequel. And what is the thing from The Hobbit that's not resolved is the ring. We don't know what it is. Bilbo still has this magic ring, and there's sort of this other threat of the necromancer. The evil in Mirkwood Forest in the southern part of Dol Guldur, Sauron, Gurthaur, the necromancer. And so, with the title, The Lord of the Rings, they're telling you some important information right on the cover. One is that there are more than one ring. There's more than one rings. And the second is that there is a lord of them. So now you start thinking of well, Bilbo's going to be in a lot of trouble now. He's got somebody's ring. And then, of course, we learn that, Bilbo winds up retiring, and it's Frodo's story. Okay. Back to the comments then. Rim Services mentions that, I think I mentioned that in my last reading that hobbits smoke and men smoke, and you don't really see elves ever smoking. Elves think it's strange that people smoke. But Rim Services adds that dwarves also smoke. At least Thorin did at Bilbo's house, and Gimli at the gates of Isengard. So that is excellent. I hadn't thought of that, Well, see, the thing is, Dracula, it would take me more than one stream to get through that, So, I don't know. It's a good idea to do that, but I don't think it's an idea that will happen so soon. Then Rob FM90 says, awesome, I'm currently at the Council of Elrond. I may just go back to sync with you guys. Saludos. And then the Puerto Rican flag. So that's a really cool comment there. Matt Thaber, I think it is, or it might be Matt Habier, 4837 wrote, if you want lavish depictions of food. Oh, so yeah, I commented last time that people associate Tolkien with these lavish descriptions of meals, and I said it's not really a thing. You don't really see that. That's more of a C.S. Lewis thing, not a J.R.R. Tolkien thing. So he wrote, if you want lavish depictions of food, good plain food, as good as the Shire could show, you will find them in the Little House on the Prairie books. Those are what I remember from my childhood. And what's funny is I remember reading some or most of those books, and I remember there was a lot of salted pork. That's the one thing that I remember. They kept saying salted pork. And as a kid, I had no idea what salted pork was. I thought they were making pork chops and just dousing them in salt, I didn't know that it was like a curing method at the time. Monkismo, who's one of my members on YouTube, wrote, I can't believe the elves would allow any smoking, even by Gandalf. I think it's mentioned the dwarves smoke as well. As did they also acquire the custom from the hobbits? Everybody that smokes acquired the custom from the hobbits. The hobbits were the first ones to smoke. Nobody smoked before they figured it all out. Who knows why they figured it out? Pipeweed, as we talked about last time, was an aromatic sort of, a plant that came from Numenor and was brought over by the men of Numenor, but they used it as a potpourri. Yes, he mentions dwarves drinking. Everybody drinks. Everybody drinks. They mention it as a potpourri, and just appreciating it for the sweet smell that the leaves give off. And then in once the hobbits got a hold of it, they somehow figured out how to smoke it. Maybe a plant burned at one point, and they were like, "Oh, that's nice. Maybe we should roll it up and smoke it." I don't know. But they did invent smoking in this. Let's see. Buttoning Benjamin 5687 writes, "Can't wait for Chapter 3 and the start of the quest, but it is not your own Shire." Well, we're going to be getting to Chapter 3 very shortly. That's where we're going to be starting today, actually. CW Train writes, "It was." Oh, I love this line from Mary. We got to this last time. "It was a compliment and therefore not true. I can respect that sort of self-ownership." Although I don't think that Merry was owning himself. I think he was razzing Frodo. He just roasted Frodo in the spectacular fashion. I always thought that was rather cute. Let's see. Maholix wrote, "I just wanted to say thank you for your reading videos. I fully believe that they are in fact transformative. As someone who started my journey into Tolkien's works from this book that you're currently reading, it really does bring me back. There was a lot of context that is provided from your insights, which really helps me understand the work and its overall plotline so much more. I used to play The Lord of the Rings online before it got super microtransacting, as one of their favorite things to do was just sit amongst the community hearing all of these like-minded souls talking about the deep lore and their theories about it. But my knowledge of such lore stems from this book in particular. I had seen a little bit of the movies, knew who Gandalf was, but not his true nature. And when a friend of mine mentioned all the background lore behind everything, I got super invested. It's what got me to read Tolkien's works, and I started here." This is quite the lengthy comment, not that I mind. "Now, as someone who is more versed in the lore than many of the people around me, I often am still confused more by the different accounts of the battles or of the journeys. I understand most of the lore that surrounds the movies in particular. And yet your reading The Hobbit prior to really helped me understand what really formed the journey that Frodo was about to go on. For some reason, it never occurred to me that the wealth Bilbo has is from the Dragon Hoard. I always just thought it was family money." I was going to cut in here and say some of it absolutely was family money. His father was rich and his mother was even richer. So he was already rich when he left on his journey. It's just that he came back with a lot of money. "But beyond that, I never read Unfinished Tales, mostly because of its unfinished nature confused me. What was used, what was canon, what wasn't, it isn't always clear." That's very true. It is difficult to discern that. And I spoke about this in a recent video about canon and how it's not really a thing with Tolkien because his ideas were ever evolving and ever changing. "So yeah, your insights into the chapters have given me a sense of reading the books again, this time as a more informed individual that is true transformative media." Which is excellent because I've said we want these streams to be transformative. I don't want to just read the book, which you're not allowed to just do that. It is copyrighted, but when you're educational and transformative, that's different. That's fair use. "So again, I'm thankful for your chapter videos, and I'm excited to continue reading through Tolkien's works with you." Well, thank you for that comment. And I have one more for Briand Hayes 5906. I hope I said that right. You really nailed the Gandalf voice. "So like many of us in your orbit, I do The Lord of the Rings every autumn in some form. Last year it was Circus's reading. This year it's you. Looking forward to this. Thank you for your work." And there was a comment that replied to that from Zephyr Optional who says, "John seamlessly shifts from frustrated and irritated Gandalf to compassionate and wise Gandalf to serious and urgent Gandalf like a pro. Looking forward to hearing his Gimli. Oh, I do Gimli very well. I do him like this. You fool of a took." All right. So I wanted to go over the comments because we got a lot more comments on that one than we did on The Hobbit. I think people enjoyed The Hobbit, but they were really waiting for The Lord of the Rings, which is understandable, of course. People it's the more popular work overall. You know, which is interesting is what's interesting is it wasn't a big hit at first, The Lord of the Rings. It came out in the 50s. The first two books in, I believe it was 1954, off the top of my head. Let me look at the copyright page and I'll tell you. I believe it was 1954, or 53 rather, when it was first. Well, this is 1965 because it's a revised edition, but I'm looking for the... I don't know, I think it was 53 when The Fellowship of the Ring came out, and The Two Towers came out later that same year, and the next year after that was The Return of the King. They weren't big hits at first. It had been, over 20 years since The Hobbit, so a lot of the kids that grew up with The Hobbit and wanted the second part were now grown up, and it was the 60s that did it. The 60s, the hippie culture, actually, believe it or not. The hippie culture lashed on really strong with The Lord of the Rings and popularized it. And it blew up in the 60s and 70s because of this. And what's interesting is, it became an example of one of the earliest memes, but one of the earliest modern memes of Frodo lives. There used to be graffiti all over the place that said that. Oh, that's Laurel. Let me just link her. Okay. So, sorry about the noises. That was Facebook ping. That was Laurel. So yeah, people used to put that on walls. Frodo lives with exclamation point. I was told that when I was born, when I was a little baby boy in December of 1980, that's when I was born, I had very hairy feet. I still have hairy feet. But, babies sometimes when we're born, we have like just shaggy, weird body hair that usually kind of sloughs off after a few days, A lot of babies have that. And apparently I had a bunch of that on my feet, so I'd look like a hobbit. And apparently my parents had got me a onesie that said Frodo lives on it, because that was a whole thing. Obviously, I had no idea. I was barely self-aware. I didn't even know what hands were at that part, not much less Frodo or anything like that. But anyway, guys, so last time, we'll do the recap here. Let's come over to our reading stream, though, and I'm going to have to adjust the oh, not that one. I'm going to have to adjust the camera as well, because it's, I want it to center on me a little bit. Oh, wrong way. Here we go. Okay, that's better. So, yeah, we're going to do our little recap. So, we read the foreword and the intro and all of that stuff. And we learned from that, a recap of stuff that we already knew from The Hobbit. We learned what hobbits were, a bit about their history and the different types of hobbit, and we learned a whole lot about pipeweed. So there is that. And then we had Bilbo's 111th birthday party, or as he puts it, his 111st birthday party, in which he vanished, disappeared, insulted everybody. If I live to be 111, doesn't seem too likely, but if I ever live to be 111, I would certainly like to just insult everybody at my birthday party. Not because I want to insult my friends and family, but because I feel that, like, if I live to be 111, it would be expected of me to do that as such a massive fan of The Lord of the Rings. Bilbo gave up the ring to Frodo. Frodo inherited it, although Gandalf warned him he doesn't feel this ring is all that great. Gandalf goes away. 17 years pass. Gandalf comes back and tells him, hey, that ring, it's not so great after all. That's Sauron's ring. And you're going to have to get out of here because Sauron met Gollum. And he knows about everything, and he knows you have his ring, and you need to leave. And that's where we left off, with Sam being the first person to join this party as well. So here we are, chapter 3. 3 is company. You ought to go quietly, and you ought to go soon, said Gandalf. 2 or 3 weeks it's not Gandalf. 2 or 3 weeks had passed, and still Frodo made no sign of getting ready to go. I know, but it is difficult to do both, he objected. If I just vanish like Bilbo, the tale will be all over the Shire in no time. Of course you mustn't vanish, said Gandalf. That wouldn't do at all. I said soon, not instantly. If you can think of any way of slipping out of the Shire without its being generally known, it will be worth a little delay, but you must not delay too long. What about the autumn? On or after our birthday? Asked Frodo. I think I could probably make some arrangement by then. To tell the truth, he was very reluctant to start now that it had come to the point. Bag End seemed like a more desirable residence than it had for years, and he wanted to savor as much as he could of his last summer in the Shire. When autumn came, he knew that in part at least of his heart would think more kindly of journeying, as it always did on that season. He had indeed privately made up his mind to leave on this 50th birthday, Bilbo's 128th. It seemed somehow the proper day on which to set out and follow him. Following Bilbo was uppermost in his mind, and the one thing that made the thought of leaving bearable. He thought as little as possible about the ring, and where it might lead him in the end. But he did not tell all his thoughts to Gandalf. What the wizard guessed was always difficult to tell. He looked at Frodo and smiled. "Very well. I think that will do. But it must not be any later. I'm getting very anxious. In the meanwhile, do take care, and don't let out any hint of where you are going. And see that Sam Gamgee does not talk. If he does, I shall really turn him into a toad." "As for where I am going," said Frodo, "it would be difficult to give that away, for I have no clear idea myself yet." "Don't be absurd," said Gandalf. "I'm not warning you against leaving an address at the post office, but you are leaving the Shire, and that should not be known until you are far away, and you must go, or at least set out, either north, south, west, or east, and the directions should certainly not be known." "I have been so taken up with the thought of leaving Bag End, and of saying farewell, that I have never even considered the direction," said Frodo. "But where am I to go, and by what shall I steer? What is to be my quest? Bilbo went to find a treasure, there and back again. But I go to lose one, and not return, as far as I can see." "But you cannot see very far," said Gandalf. "Neither can I. It may be your task to find the cracks of doom, but that quest may be for others, I do not know. At any rate, you are not ready for that long road yet." "No, indeed," said Frodo. "But in the meantime, what course am I to take?" "Towards danger, but not too rashly nor too straight," answered the wizard. "If you want my advice, make for Rivendell. That journey should not prove too perilous, though the road is less easy than it was, and it will grow worse as the year falls." "Rivendell," said Frodo. "Very good. I will go east, and I will make for Rivendell. I will take Sam to visit the elves. He will be delighted." He spoke lightly, but his heart was moved suddenly with a desire to see the house of Elrond Half-Elven, and breathe the air of that deep valley where many of the fair folk still dwelt in peace. One summer's evening, an astonishing piece of news reached the Ivy Bush and Green Dragon. Giants and other portents on the borders of the Shire were forgotten for more important matters. Mr. Frodo was selling Bag End. Indeed, he had already sold it, to the Sackville Bagginses. "For a nice bit, too," said some. "At a bargain price," said others. "And that's more likely when Mistress Lobelia's the buyer." Otho died some years before at the ripe but disappointed age of 102. Just why Mr. Frodo was selling his beautiful hall was even more debatable than the price. A few held the theory, supported by the nods and hints of Mr. Baggins himself, that Frodo's money was running out. He was going to leave Hobbiton and live in a quiet way, out on the proceeds of the sale down in Buckland among his Brandybuck relations. As far from the Sackville Bagginses as may be, some added, but so firmly fixed had this notion of the immeasurable wealth of the Bagginses of Bag End become, that most found this hard to believe, harder than any other reason or unreason that their fancy could suggest. To most it suggested a dark and yet unrevealed plot by Gandalf. Though he kept himself very quiet and did not go about by day, it was well known that he was hiding up in Bag End. But however a removal might fit in with the designs of his wizardry, there was no doubt about the fact. Frodo Baggins was going back to Buckland. So, to pause here and comment on a few things. So, Frodo's interesting because Bilbo was sort of conflicted himself. He wanted to go, but he didn't want to go, but he kind of wanted to go. Frodo is even more like Bilbo than Bilbo is in some ways, and I think there was even a point where Bilbo pointed out that he still loves the Shire. He's not ready to go out on these grand adventures, but Frodo was 33 at the time. Now he's 49. He's about to be 50 years old, and that was the same age that Bilbo had set out on his adventure. Notice that the hobbits of the Shire really don't like Gandalf all that much. I've talked about this a few times, And they're saying, well, he's hiding up there in Bag End. He's up to something. This might be something that's his doing. And believe it or not, the reason that Gandalf is thought so poorly of in the Shire actually has to do with Saruman. We learn much later that Saruman has a very large stash of pipeweed from the Shire in his storerooms at Isengard. And he has this secret habit, even as he sort of thinks that it's a shameful thing that shouldn't be done in public. He yelled at Gandalf at one point for smoking at a White Council meeting, but he himself is indulging in this vice as well, just privately. He thinks it's a shameful thing. And at this point in the story, Saruman has already been to the Shire a few times in disguise. And when you're a hobbit who is not like a very important character, you see one very, very tall old man. Not that Gandalf and Saruman are very tall. They're average height, but to a hobbit, they're big people, you know. So they're very tall old men with beards and cloaks. You know, if you've seen one wizard, you've seen them all, right? So a lot of people in the Shire believe that Saruman was actually Gandalf. And because Saruman is not very well behaved, he actually damaged Gandalf's reputation in the Shire by appearing there. Because he's up to no good. So a lot of people thought that was Gandalf. The only other thing I wanted to mention here is, they mentioned the Ivy Bush and the Green Dragon. These are both pubs. The Green Dragon is in a place called Bywater. It's going to be mentioned a few times. The Ivy Bush, I'm not exactly sure where that is, but you could really feel that the Shire is England in this sense, that there's pubs everywhere, and that this is where people gather and share news and rumors with each other. And of course, there's lots of news and rumors. And Frodo is actually, we see, that's the thing. It's Moogle. It's not just a place to get drunk. It's a social gathering. These days, we would think of a pub as a place that you go to eat and drink. But in rural England of Tolkien's youth and indeed his adulthood as well, it was the social gathering place. Of course, they did not have the internet, you know. They didn't have chat rooms. They had pubs, and this is where they would gather. You don't remember if the Green Dragon was in the PC game? Well, which PC game are you speaking of? I mean, Frodo doesn't actually go to the Green Dragon. Sam wants to go there, but then he doesn't. Bilbo went there in the Hobbit. Okay, let's continue on. Yes, I shall be moving this autumn, he said. Merry Brandybuck is looking out for a nice little hole for me, or perhaps a small house. As a matter of fact, with Mary's help, he'd already chosen and bought a little house at Crick Hollow, in the country beyond Bucklebury. To all but Sam, he pretended he was going to settle down there permanently. The decision to set out eastwards had suggested the idea to him, for Buckland was on the eastern borders of the Shire, and as he had lived there in his childhood, his going back would at least seem credible. Oh, are you talking about, I'm sorry to interrupt, the Lord of the Rings Volume 1 for PC? The pub in that would have been the Prancing Pony. Gandalf stayed in the Shire for over 2 months. Then one evening at the end of June, just after Frodo's plan had been firmly arranged, he suddenly announced that he was going off again next morning. "Only for a short while, I hope," he said. "But I'm going down beyond the southern borders to get some news if I can. I have been idle longer than I should." He spoke lightly, but it seemed to Frodo that he looked rather worried. "Has anything happened?" he asked. "Well, no, but I have heard something that made me anxious and needs looking into. If I think it necessary, after all, for you to get off at once, I shall come back immediately, or at least send word. In the meanwhile, stick to your plan, but be more careful than ever, especially of the ring. Let me impress on you once more, don't use it." He went off at dawn. "I may be back any day," he said. "At the very latest, I shall come back for the farewell party. I think, after all, you may need my company on the road." At first, Frodo was a good deal disturbed, and wondered often what Gandalf could have heard, but his uneasiness wore off. and in the fine weather he forgot his troubles for a while. The Shire had seldom seen so fair a summer, or so rich an autumn. The trees were laden with apples, honey was dripping in the combs, and the corn was tall and full. Autumn was well under way before Frodo began to worry about Gandalf again. September was passing, and there was still no news of him. The birthday and the removal drew nearer. And still he did not come or send word. Bag End began to be busy. Some of Frodo's friends came to stay and help him with the packing. There was Fredegar Bolger and Folko Boffin, and of course his special friends, Pippin, Took, and Merry Brandybuck. Between them they turned the whole place upside down. On September 20th, 2 covered cars went off Ladin to Buckland, conveying the furniture and goods that Frodo had not sold to his new home, by way of the Brandywine Bridge. The next day Frodo became really anxious and kept a constant lookout for Gandalf. Thursday, his birthday morning, dawned as fair and clear as it had long ago for Bilbo's great party. Still Gandalf did not appear. In the evening, Frodo gave his farewell feast. It was quite small, just a dinner for himself and his 4 helpers, but he was troubled and felt in no mood for it. The thought that he would so soon have to part with his young friends weighed on his heart. He wondered how he would break it to them. The 4 younger hobbits were, however, in high spirits, and the party soon became very cheerful in spite of Gandalf's absence. The dining room was bare except for a table and chairs, but the food was good, and there was good wine. Frodo's wine had not been included in the sale to the Sackville Bagginses. "Whatever happens to the rest of my stuff, when the SBs get their claws on it at any rate, I have found a good home for this," said Frodo as he drained his glass. It was the last drop of Old Vineyards. When they had sung many songs and talked of many things they had done together, they toasted Bilbo's birthday, and they drank his health and Frodo's together according to Frodo's custom. Then they went off for a sniff of air and a glimpse of the stars, and then they went to bed. Frodo's party was over, and Gandalf had not come. Just to belabor a point that we had already made at several junctures here, that Tolkien does not, in fact, describe meals very often or really at all. This is Bilbo's party. I mean, Bilbo's party, this is Frodo's party. Bilbo's party, they just said there's a lot of food. They never really said what it was, just that there was a lot of food. This is Frodo's party. The food was good. The wine was good. That's all you get. You don't get these vast descriptions. I think people who grew up with The Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia sort of conflate the two a little bit, because the Chronicles of Narnia had so many ridiculously opulent descriptions of food. And I remember C.S. Lewis was once asked, do you do that as a way of sort of like, you can't really do romantic scenes because it's all children, so is that sort of a substitute? And he's like, no, I just like it. So there you go. The next morning they were busy packing another cart with the remainder of the luggage. Merry took charge of this and drove off with Fatty, that is, Fredegar Bolger. "Someone must get there and warm the house before you arrive," said Merry. "Well, see you later, the day after tomorrow, and if you don't go to sleep on the way." Folko went home after lunch, but Pippin remained behind. Frodo was restless and anxious, listening in vain for a sound of Gandalf. He decided to wait until nightfall. After that, if Gandalf wanted him urgently, he would go to Crickhollow, and might even get there first, for Frodo was going on foot. His plan, for pleasure and a last look at the Shire as much as any other reason, was to walk from Hobbiton to Buckleberry Ferry, taking it fairly easy. I shall get myself a bit into training, too, he said, looking at himself in a dusty mirror in the half-empty hall. He had not done any strenuous walking for a long time, and the reflection looked rather flabby, he thought. So I'm just going to pause here and mention the films. Somebody asked me on Quora not super long ago who was sort of the best cast actor for The Lord of the Rings, and I've always said that sort of the best depiction of a character from The Lord of the Rings, or perhaps the best depiction of any character from any novel, has to be Sam Gamgee. Sean Astin as Sam Gamgee. Even though that was my first thought. I didn't say that in the answer. But then I thought, here's the thing though, Sam didn't look right. He acted perfectly. Sean did a great job playing Sam, a fantastic job even. But I went with Ian McKellen as Gandalf because Ian McKellen looked like Gandalf, whereas Sean Astin didn't really look like Sam. In the films, Sam was sort of the chubby one of the group, whereas here you can see it's actually Frodo who's the chubby one of the group. Sam, as a hobbit who is not of means, he's a servant. He's a gardener. He probably doesn't get 6 meals a day every day. And he works outside with his hands. He might be more muscular than anything. He might be kind of an impressive physique, whereas Frodo is sort of the soft aristocrat who doesn't really get around much. So I thought I'd mention that as well. After lunch, the Sackville Bagginses, Lobelia and her sandy-haired son Lotho turned up, much to Frodo's annoyance. "Ours at last," said Lobelia as she stepped inside. It was not polite, nor strictly true, for the sale of Bag End did not take effect until midnight. But Lobelia can perhaps be forgiven. She had been obliged to wait about 77 years longer for Bag End than she had once hoped, and she was now 100 years old. Anyway, she had come to see that nothing she had paid for had been carried off, and she wanted the keys. It took a long while to satisfy her, as she had brought a complete inventory with her, and went right through it. In the end, she departed with Lotho and the spare key, and the promise that the other key would be left at the Gamgees in Bagshot Row. She snorted, and showed plainly that she thought the Gamgees capable of plundering the whole during the night. Frodo did not offer her any tea. He took his own tea with Pippin and Sam Gamgee in the kitchen. It had been officially announced that Sam was coming to Buckland to do for Mr. Frodo and look after his bit of garden, an arrangement that was approved by the gaffer, although it did not console him for the prospect of having Lobelia as a neighbor. "Our last meal at Bag End," said Frodo, pushing back his chair. They left the washing up for Lobelia. Pippin and Sam strapped up their 3 packs and piled them into the porch. Pippin went out for his last stroll in the garden. Sam disappeared. The sun went down. Bag End seemed sad and gloomy and disheveled. Frodo wandered around the familiar rooms and saw the light of the sunset fade on the walls and shadows creep out of the corners. It grew slowly dark indoors. He went out and walked down to the gate at the bottom of the path, and then on a short way down the hill road. He half expected to see Gandalf come striding up through the dusk. The sky was clear, and the stars were growing bright. "It's going to be a fine night," he said aloud. "That's good for a beginning. I feel like walking. I can't bear any more hanging about. I'm going to start, and Gandalf must follow me." He turned to go back, and then stopped, for he heard voices just round the corner at the other end of Bagshot Row. One voice was certainly the old gaffer's. The other was strange and somehow unpleasant. He could not make out what was said, but he heard the gaffer's answers, which were rather shrill. The old man seemed put out. "No, Mr. Baggins has gone away. Went this morning, and my Sam went with him. Anyway, all his stuff went. Yes, sold out and gone, I tell 'ee. Why? Why's none of my business or yours. Where to? That ain't no secret. He's moved to Buckleberry or some such place, away down yonder. Yes, it is a tidy way. I've never been so far myself. They're queer folks in Buckland. No, I can't give no message. Good night to you." Footsteps went away down the hill. Frodo wondered vaguely why the fact that they did not come up the hill seemed a great relief. "I am sick of questions and curiosity about my doings, I suppose," he thought. "What an inquisitive lot they all are." He had half a mind to go and ask the gaffer who the inquirer was, but he thought better or worse of it, and turned and walked quickly back to Bag End. Pippin was sitting on his pack in the porch. Sam was not there. Frodo stepped inside the dark door. "Sam," he called. "Sam! Time!" "Coming, sir," said the answer from far within, followed soon by Sam himself wiping his mouth. He had been saying farewell to the beer barrel in the cellar. "All aboard, Sam?" said Frodo. "Yes, sir. I'll last for a bit now, sir." Frodo shut and locked the round door and gave the key to Sam. "Run down with us to your home, Sam," he said, "then cut along the row and meet us as quick as you can get to the gate in the lane beyond the meadows. We are not going through the village tonight. Too many eyes pricking and eyes prying. Ears pricking and eyes prying. Third time the charm." Sam ran off at full speed. "Well, now we're off at last," said Frodo. They shouldered their packs and took up their sticks and walked round the corner to the west side of Bag End. "Goodbye," said Frodo, looking at the dark, blank windows. He waved his hand and then turned, and following Bilbo, if he had known it, hurried after Peregrine down the garden path. They jumped over the low place in the hedge at the bottom, and took to the fields, passing into darkness like a rustle in the grasses. At the bottom of the hill, on its western side, they came to the gate opening on a narrow lane. There they halted and adjusted the straps on their packs. Presently Sam appeared, trotting quickly and breathing hard. His heavy pack was hoisted high on his shoulders, and he had put on his head a tall, shapeless felt bag, which he called a hat. In the gloom he looked very much like a dwarf. "I am sure you have given me all the heaviest stuff," said Frodo. I pity snails and all that carry their homes on their backs." "I could take a lot yet more, sir. My packet is quite light," said Sam, stoutly and untruthfully. "No, you don't, Sam," said Pippin. "It's good for him. He's got nothing except what he ordered us to pack. He's been slack lately, and he'll feel the weight less when he's walked off some of his own." "Be kind to a poor old hobbit," laughed Frodo. "I shall be thin as a willow wand, I am sure, before I get to Buckland. But I was talking nonsense. I suspect you have taken more than your share, Sam, and I shall look into it at our next unpacking." He picked up his stick again. "Well, we all like walking in the dark," he said, "so let's put some miles behind us before bed." For a short way they followed the lane westwards. Then, leaving it, they turned left and looked quietly to the fields again. They went in single file along hedgerows and the borders of coppices, and night felt dark before them. In their dark cloaks they were as invisible as if they all had magic rings. Since they were all hobbits, and were trying to be silent, they made no noise that even hobbits would hear. Even the wild things in the field and woods hardly noticed their passing. After some time they crossed the water, west of Hobbiton, by a narrow plank bridge. The stream was there no more than a winding black ribbon, bordered with leaning alder trees. A mile or two further south they hastily crossed the great road from the Brandywine Bridge. They were now in the Tookland, and bending southeastward they made for the Green Hill country. As they began to climb its first slopes, they looked back and saw the lamps in Hobbiton far off, twinkling in the gentle valley of the water. Soon it disappeared in the folds of the darkened land, and was followed by Bywater beside its grey pool. When the light of the last farm was far behind, peeping among the trees, Frodo turned and waved a hand in farewell. "I wonder if I shall ever look down into that valley again," he said quietly. When they had walked for about 3 hours, they rested. The night was clear, cool, and starry, but smoke like wisps of mist were creeping up the hillsides from the streams and deep meadows. Thin-clad birches, swaying in a light wind above their heads, made a black net against the pale sky. They ate a very frugal supper for hobbits, and then went on again. Soon they struck a narrow road that went rolling up and down, fading grey into the darkness ahead. The road to Woodhall and Stock and the Buckleberry Ferry. It climbed away from the main road in the water valley and wound over the skirts of the green hills towards Woody End, a wild corner of the East Farthing. After a while they plunged into a deeply cloven track between tall trees that rustled their dry leaves in the night. It was very dark. At first they talked or hummed a tune softly together, being now far away from inquisitive ears. Then they marched on in silence, and Pippin began to lag behind. At last they began to climb a steep slope. He stopped and yawned. "I'm so sleepy," he said, "that soon I shall fall down on the road. Are you going to sleep on your legs? It's nearly midnight." "I thought you liked walking in the dark," said Frodo, "but there is no great hurry. Merry expects us sometime the day after tomorrow, but that leaves us nearly 2 days more. We'll halt at the first likely spot." "The wind's in the west," said Sam. "If we get to the other side of this hill, we shall find a spot that is sheltered and snug enough, sir. There is a dry firwood just ahead, if I remember rightly." Sam knew the land well within 20 miles of Hobbiton, but that was the limit of his geography. Just over the top of the hill, they came on the patch of firwood. Leaving the road, they went into the deep resin-scented darkness of the trees and gathered dead sticks and cones to make a fire. Soon they had a merry cackle of flame at the foot of a large fir tree, and they sat round it for a while until they began to nod. Then, each in the angle of the great tree's roots, they curled up in their cloaks and blankets and were soon fast asleep. They set no watch. Even Frodo feared no danger, for they were still in the heart of the Shire. A few creatures came and looked at them when the fire had died away. A fox passing through the wood on business of his own stopped several minutes and sniffed. Hobbits, he thought. Well, why not? Well, what next? I heard of strange doings in this land, but I have seldom heard of hobbits sleeping out of doors under a tree. 3 of them. There's something mighty queer behind this. He was quite right, but he never found out any more about it. Okay, we have to stop here. Because we've just touched on something very strange, which is often referred to in the Tolkien community as the thinking fox. We get to this point where they are traveling through the fields, and as I mentioned, Tolkien is not somebody who describes meals in great detail, but does usually describe scenery in great detail. And, if you close your eyes, you could see it. You could see the valleys and the trees. He's even telling you what types of trees are where everything is. And they stop here And they curl up sort of in the abscess of this large tree, and they fall asleep. And then here comes a little fox pattering there, sniffs at them, and has some thoughts. Well, this is strange. 3 hobbits sleeping in the road, or near the road. And then he goes off, and it even mentions that the fox never found out what it was all about. Now, if we think of this, it's a very unique passage, because Tolkien doesn't usually give us the thoughts of the non-focal characters. We know what Frodo is thinking, because he's a focal character. At times, especially in The Return of the King, we know what Sam is thinking, because there are many times in The Return of the King where Sam is the focal character. However, here, we're seeing somebody who's not a focal character, not even human, a fox. And we're getting the fox's actions and thoughts. It's quite unusual. We like, most of the time, we don't know what Legolas is thinking. We don't know what Gimli is thinking. We don't know what Sauron is thinking. We don't know what any of these characters are thinking, except for the ones that are telling the story. So that's sort of one way in which this passage is strange, because it's an anomaly. Even in The Hobbit, where we had talking birds, we were, hold on one second, yes?
Was there grape juice in the groceries?
I didn't see any, come to think of it.
That's weird. I had to check it.
It could possibly be in the trunk.
Well, I'm going to check online, see if they took it off or what first.
I come to think of it, did not see any.
I don't know if I can go down the steps right now.
Well, I can't right now either, but yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Okay, sorry about that. What point was I making? I was talking about the fox, I know that. Oh, so it's unusual for one instance in that we're getting the thoughts of not only a non-focal character, but a non-human character, an animal. And even in The Hobbit, where we had talking birds, we weren't privy to their thoughts. We were privy to what they said, and they spoke mainly to Thorin, and there was a point where one of the birds spoke to Bard. But we don't know what they're thinking or anything like that. So here we get a character that, hey Ted, is not human and thinking like that, and it's sort of unusual. Now we assume that if animals can talk, and that is established that some animals in Middle-earth absolutely can talk, then certainly they have these thoughts. But in-universe, where this is a memoir that Frodo was writing with the help of Sam and a few other characters, who wrote that and why? Did it really happen? And this is why we speak of differing accounts. And I'm not just, when I say differing accounts, I don't just mean that Tolkien had this draft or that draft, or, like however many versions of Beren and Luthien there are, all the different versions of the Fall of Gondolin, writings that contradict the Silmarillion. And I've always said the Silmarillion is the Elvish account of what happened. The Book of Lost Tales is the man's account, the mortal men, that's their account of what happened. This story is the Hobbit account of something that happened. And I think that what we get here is we look at the difference in style between The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings. And The Hobbit is almost a fable, in a sense. Almost a fable. And we're seeing the early portions. We're still in book 1 here. Book 1 of 6. Where it very much is the second part of The Hobbit. But even in The Hobbit, though, we didn't get a passage like this. And I feel like whoever the in-universe author was, whether it was Frodo or Sam for this portion, it was probably Frodo. It might have been embellished by Sam. Nobody was watching. It's actually pointed out that all 3 of them are sleeping. And it's only 3 people. It's Frodo and Sam and Pippin. Nobody was awake. But somebody wrote that down, that a fox came and sniffed at them, had certain thoughts about it, thought it was strange that they were there, left, and even tells us that this fox Never found out what that was all about. And to me, it seems like a bit of fantastical storytelling in universe where Frodo is sort of emulating Bilbo's writing style in his own way and saying things that didn't happen in a way of telling the story. And when we get to Unfinished Tales at one part, thank you, Alice, for gifting that sub to Metalhead. Thank you very much. Welcome into the stream as well. We were just talking about the Thinking Fox, and I'm curious to anybody else's thoughts on this. When we get to reading Unfinished Tales, which we will at some point, there's a story in there called the Quest for Erebor, which takes place during the Return of the King, but is greatly concerned with the Hobbit, and Gandalf reveals to the characters that are present, which is Frodo and Merry and Pippin and Sam and Gimli, that the events of The Hobbit did not exactly happen the way that Bilbo wrote them down. And we're not just talking about the way that he wrote about Gollum. We're talking about the way that he wrote about Thorin, for instance. And Gandalf sort of wonders to himself, was Bilbo lying about Thorin and writing him to be a better person than he was? Or was he oblivious to how nasty Thorin could be and how disrespectful Thorin was to him? And Gandalf doesn't rightly know the answer. I suspect that it's a little bit of both, to be honest with you. But this is our example that the narrators here are unreliable narrators, that these events, of course they didn't really happen because it's a fantasy story, but in universe, they didn't necessarily happen the way that Frodo or Bilbo or anybody says they did. I would imagine that Gandalf is telling the truth. Elrond is telling the truth in his account, which is in the Silmarillion. But Frodo, at least here, is telling a story. And in his story, in this beginning part where he hasn't seen danger yet, it's still a friendly jaunt with his friends. He knows he's going into danger, but he hasn't experienced it yet. Now, in the previous scene, when he was leaving the house and he heard Sam's dad yelling at somebody, he assumed in his head that must have been some hobbit that was just asking too many questions. But there was something in his head, there was some little inkling that made him not want to, the grape juice was in the trunk, by the way, not want to say anything. And we learn later that the person that was speaking to Sam's father was one of the Nazgul, one of the ring wraiths. And if Frodo had gone up there to see what that was all about, he would have died. He has already been incredibly close to danger, but he doesn't even know that. But here's the thing. As of writing it, he knows it because he writes it when he gets home. Right? And then he passes it on to Sam, and Sam finishes the story. So he's telling this story where he's already had this incredible brush with danger that he wasn't even aware with, and now he just puts in this whimsical little bit where a fox comes and thinks about them for a little while. And I think he's trying to do two things here. Frodo is the in-universe author. He's trying to, A, keep the story light and build up to the danger, and B, foreshadow, because the fox's thoughts are that this is strange. And the thing is that book one is really Frodo meeting people along the way, or people and things, I should say, and we're going to get to a lot of characters that he runs into. But the first is the thinking fox, and I just wanted to pause for a bit and talk about that. I would be very curious whether it's live or whether you're leaving a comment on YouTube later, what your thoughts are on the thinking fox and why this is in the book at all. The morning came, pale and clammy. Frodo woke up first and found that a tree root had made a hole in his back and that his neck was stiff. Walking for pleasure. Why didn't I drive, he thought, as he usually did at the beginning of an expedition. All my beautiful feather beds are sold to the Sackville Bagginses. These tree roots would do them good. He stretched. Wake up, hobbits, he cried. It's a beautiful morning. What's beautiful about it, said Pippin, peering over the edge of his blanket with one eye. Sam, get breakfast ready for 9:30. Have you got the bathwater hot? Sam jumped up, looking rather bleary. No, sir, I haven't, sir, he said. Frodo stripped the blankets from Pippin, rolled him over, and then walked off to the edge of the wood. Away eastward, the sun was rising red out of the mist that lay thick on the world. Touched with a gold and red, the autumn trees seemed to be sailing rootless in a shadowy sea. A little below him, to the left of the road, ran steeply down into a hollow and disappeared. When he returned, Sam and Pippin had a good fire going. Water, shouted Pippin. Where's the water? I don't keep water in my pockets, said Frodo. We thought you'd gone to find some, said Pippin, busy setting out the food and cups. You'd better go now. You can come too, said Frodo, and bring all the water bottles. There was a stream at the foot of the hill. They filled their bottles and the small camping kettle at a little fall where the water fell a few feet over an outcrop of gray stone. It was icy cold, and they spluttered and puffed as they bathed their faces and hands. When their breakfast was over and their packs all trussed up again, it was after 10 o'clock, and the day was beginning to turn fine and hot. They went down the slope and across the stream where it dived under the road, and up the next slope, and up and down another shoulder of the hills, and by that time their cloaks, blankets, water, food, and other gear already seemed a heavy burden. The day's march promised to be a warm and tiring work. After some miles, however, the road ceased to roll up and down. It climbed to the top of a steep bank in a weary zigzagging sort of way, and then prepared to go down for the last time. In front of them they saw the lower lands dotted with small clumps of trees that melted away in the distance to a brown woodland haze. They were looking across the woody end toward the Brandywine River. The road wound away before them like a piece of string. The road goes on forever, said Pippin, but I can't without a rest. It is high time for lunch. He sat down at the bank at the side of the road and looked away east to the haze, beyond which lay the river, and the end of the shire in which he had spent all his life. Sam stood by him. His round eyes were wide open, for he was looking across lands he had never seen to a new horizon. Do elves live in those woods? He asked. Not that I ever heard, said Pippin. Frodo was silent. He, too, was gazing eastward along the road, as if he had never seen it before. Suddenly he spoke aloud, but as if to himself, saying slowly, The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with weary feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then, I cannot say. That sounds like a bit of old Bilbo's rhyming, said Pippin. Or is it one of your imitations? It does not sound altogether encouraging. I don't know, said Frodo. It came to me then, as if I was making it up, but I may have heard it long ago. Certainly it reminds me very much of Bilbo in the last years before he went away. He used often to say there was only one road, that it was like a great river. Its springs were at every doorstep, and every path was its tributary. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door, he used to say. You step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no telling where you might be swept off to. Do you realize this is the very path that goes through Mirkwood, and that if you let it might take you to the Lonely Mountain, or even further, and to worse places? He used to say that on the path outside the front door at Bag End, especially after he'd been out for a long walk. Well, the road won't sweep me anywhere up for an hour at least, said Pippin, unslinging his pack. The others followed his example, putting their packs against the bank and their legs out into the road. After a rest, they had a good lunch, and then some rest. So, that little poem, actually, that is a bit of Bilbo there. Here I have The Hobbit. And I'm just going to go... It's towards the very end of The Hobbit, when he's returning home along with Gandalf. This was Bilbo's version. Roads go ever on and on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun is shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow by winter sown, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever, ever on, under cloud and under star, Yet feet that wandering have gone turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known. So, and I'm going to address the chat in just a moment. So you can see that it's not the same thing, but it's similar, and Pippin mentions that he sort of did imitations of Bilbo's poetry. So that's definitely one of... He acknowledges that it may have been something that he had heard at some point, but it came to him as if he was making it up. And I have some thoughts on that I'm not going to get into fully here regarding the proximity here to water and sort of the deep mysticism of Middle-earth. But I'm not going to get into that just yet because I could talk on that for hours. So just a welcome into the stream. I'm having a hard time seeing that. Knobby Knobs, welcome into the stream. So you like the idea that the in-universe author, Frodo or Sam, keeping the story light, maybe for children who might be reading, to ease them into the serious high fantasy stuff. Yes, absolutely, and thank you for the kind words. I absolutely feel that, and I've always said that book one, which is everything from the beginning up until Frodo reaching the Ford of Bruin and passing out there after his encounter with the Nazgul, it gets progressively darker, but it very much feels like the second part of The Hobbit. It feels like this is the sequel to The Hobbit that's coming out 20 years later. It's not until book two, which sees a lot of terrible things happening. They go through Moria, Gandalf meets his end with the Balrog, and Boromir goes insane. You know, all this crazy stuff happens, and it gets very serious there. And stuff happens that is, like characters dying and what that's not exactly reversible. I mean, Gandalf does come back, but in a different sense, and there's despair and everything. Whereas in book one, everything sort of turns out okay. Like, yes, Frodo passes out at the end, and you sort of don't know what's going to happen to him. But you're halfway through the first volume. You know he lives at that point. So, all right, let's continue onwards here. The sun was beginning to get low, and the light of afternoon was on the land as they went down the hill. So far they had not yet met a soul on the road. This way was not much used, being hardly fit for carts, and there was little traffic in the woody end. They had been jogging along again for an hour or more when Sam stopped a moment as if listening. They were now on level ground, and the road after much winding lay straight ahead through grassland sprinkled with tall trees, outliers of the approaching woods. "I can hear a pony or a horse coming along the road behind," said Sam. They looked back, but the turn of the road prevented them from seeing far. "I wonder if that is Gandalf coming after us," said Frodo. But even after he said it, he had a feeling that it was not so, and a sudden desire to hide from the view of the rider came over him. "It may not matter much," he said apologetically, "but I would rather not be seen on the road, by anyone. I am sick of my doings being noticed and discussed. And if it is Gandalf," he added in an afterthought, "we can give him a little surprise to pay him out for being so late. Let's get out of sight." The other two ran quickly to the left and down into a little hollow not far from the road. There they lay flat. Frodo hesitated for a second. Curiosity or some other feeling was struggling with his desire to hide. The sound of hoofs drew nearer. Just in time, he threw himself down into a patch of long grass behind a tree that overshadowed the road. Then he lifted his head and peered cautiously above one of the great roots. Round the corner came a black horse, no hobbit pony, but a full-sized horse, and on it sat a large man who seemed to crouch in the saddle, wrapped in a great black cloak and hood, so that only his boots and the high stirrups showed below. His face was shadowed and invisible. When it reached the tree and was level with Frodo, the horse stopped. The riding figure sat quite still with its head bowed, as if listening. From inside the hood came a noise, as of someone sniffing to catch an elusive scent. The head turned from side to side of the road. A sudden unreasoning fear of discovery laid hold of Frodo, and he thought of his ring. He hardly dared to breathe, and yet the desire to get it out of his pocket became so strong that he began slowly to move his hand. He felt that he only had to slip it on, and then he would be safe. The advice of Gandalf seemed absurd. Bilbo had used the ring. "And I am still in the Shire," he thought, as his hand touched the chain on which it hung. At that moment the rider sat up and took the reins. The horse stepped forward, walking slowly at first, and then breaking into a quick trot. Frodo crawled to the edge of the road and watched the rider until he dwindled into the distance. He could not be quite sure, but it seemed to him that suddenly, before it passed out of sight, the horse turned aside and went into the trees on the right. "Well, I call that very queer and indeed disturbing," said Frodo to himself, as he walked towards his companions. Pippin and Sam had remained flat in the grass, and had seen nothing, so Frodo described the rider and his strange behavior. "I can't say why, but I felt for certain he was looking or smelling for me. And also I felt certain that I did not want him to discover me. I've never seen or felt anything like it in the Shire before." "But what has one of the big people got to do with us?" said Pippin. "And what is he doing in this part of the world?" "There are some men about," said Frodo. "Down in the South Farthing they have had trouble with big people, I believe. But I have never heard of anything like this rider. I wonder where he comes from." "Begging your pardon," put in Sam suddenly. "I know where he comes from. It's from Hobbiton that this here Black Rider comes, unless there's more than one. And I know where he's going to." "What do you mean?" said Frodo sharply, looking at him in astonishment. "Why didn't you speak up before?" "I've only just remembered, sir. It was like this. When I got back to our hole yesterday evening with the key, my dad, he says to me, 'Hello, Sam,' he says. 'I thought you were away with Mr. Frodo this morning. There's been a strange customer asking for Mr. Baggins of Bag End, and he's only just gone. I've sent him on to Buckleberry. Not that I like the sound of him. He seemed mighty put out when I told him Mr. Baggins had left his old home for good. Hissed at me, he did. It gave me quite a shudder. 'What sort of fellow was he?' says I to the gaffer. 'I don't know,' says he, 'but he wasn't a hobbit. He was tall and black-like, and he stooped over me. I reckon it was one of the big folk from foreign parts. He spoke funny.' I couldn't stay to hear more, sir, since you were waiting, and I didn't give much heed to it myself." Sorry, that scared me. The alert was so loud. Nobby Nubs, thank you for the subscription. Welcome into our community. That just scared me. Let me just finish this paragraph. That actually was the end of the paragraph there. No, it wasn't. Okay. I'm going to finish that. I'm going to restart that paragraph, and then I'm going to talk about things. "I couldn't stay to hear more, sir, since you were waiting, and I didn't give much heed to it myself. The gaffer's getting old and more than a bit blind. And it must have been near dark when this fellow came up the hill and found him taking the air at the end of our row. I hope he hasn't done no harm, sir, nor me." "The gaffer can't be blamed anyway," said Frodo. "As a matter of fact, I heard him talking to a stranger who seemed to be inquiring for me, and I nearly went and asked him who it was. I wish I had. Or you had told me about it before. I might have been more careful on the road." It's okay. For some reason, that particular alert always startles me. The other ones, not so much, but the subscriber alert, I guess because it's such a high-pitched sound, it's Thank you for the subscription, though. And as is our custom, if we could get everybody to sort of spam some emotes in the chat to not only thank Nobby Nob for subscribing, but also Alice had a gift sub in there. I forgot to acknowledge that with emotes. So if we could just have our little 11th birthday party in the chat there. So we're coming back to the Nazgul here, and what's interesting is that the Nazgul stops on the road and sort of sniffs, and what we learn later is that the Nazgul, the ring wraiths, they can't see very well, and that the horses that they're riding are actually doing most of the seeing for them. And Frodo was struck with this fear that made him want to put on the ring. And we learn that this is actually one of the Nazgul's powers. They can, not only can they put out a great aura of fear, but they can magically command Frodo to strongly compel him to try to put on the ring. And the reason is because they can't see him very well. Even if he wasn't lying in the tall grass, if he was standing before them, he would be there. They would be able to see that there was somebody in front of them, but he would be blurry and dark. But the moment he puts on the ring, they would see him with full clarity, because the ring doesn't really make you invisible. It draws you into a spirit realm that most people can't see. So that being said, that is, by the way, that also explains why does it turn you invisible, and also your clothes. Because it's not really turning you invisible. It's putting you into the spirit realm. And most people can't see the spirit realm. But the Nazgul are mostly in the spirit realm. There's a little bit of them left in the physical world, but they're mostly in this spiritual realm. The Wraith world is what Tolkien called it. And so when Frodo or whomever puts on the ring, they can see this person very, very clearly. And that's why whenever Frodo is around the ring wraiths, he is filled with this urge to put on the ring. Now, here's an interesting little bit of trivia that I will tell you. Of course, there's a whole series of books that are called The History of Middle-earth. And they greatly concern themselves with the writing process of the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, and then the last part of it is the Deep Lore, the last 3 volumes. Morgoth's Rings, The People of Middle-earth, and not the Nature of Middle-earth, that came later. The Peoples of Middle-earth, Morgoth's Ring, and the other one. There's 3 of them at the end there. They're the Deep Lore. But anyway, in the earlier drafts that you could read in books like Sauron Defeated and Treason of Isengard and such like that, we learned that there was a point where these black riders, there was only one, and it was actually Gandalf. And it was just sort of Gandalf playing a trick on the hobbits by putting on a black cloak and riding around scaring them. Obviously, that wasn't going to work in the grand scheme of things. And by the way, Nobby Nubs, I do stream every day. Tolkien streams are twice monthly, but I also, if you're into video games, I stream every day as well. Okay, let's continue on here. Still, there may be no connection between this rider and the Gaffer stranger, said Pippin. We left Hobbiton secretly enough, and I don't see how he could have followed us. What about the smelling, sir, said Sam, and the Gaffer said he was a black chap. I wish I would have waited for Gandalf, Frodo muttered, but perhaps it would only have made matters worse. Then you know or guess something about this rider, said Pippin, who had caught the muttered words. I don't know, and I would rather not guess, said Frodo. All right, Cousin Frodo. You can keep your secret for the present, if you want to be mysterious. In the meanwhile, what are we to do? I should like a bite and a sup, but somehow I think we'd better move on from here. Your talk of sniffing riders with invisible noses has unsettled me. Yes, I think we will move on now, said Frodo, but not on the road, in case that rider comes back or another follows him. We ought to do a good step more today. Buckland is still miles away. The shadows of the trees were long and thin on the grass as they started off again. They now kept a stone's throw to the left of the road and kept out of sight of it as much as they could. But this hindered them, for the grass was thick and tussocky, and the ground uneven, and the trees began to draw together into thickets. The sun had gone down red behind the hills at their backs, and evening was coming on before they came to the road at the end of the long level over which they had run straight for some miles. At that point it bent left and went down toward the lowlands of the Ale, making for Stock. But a lane branched right, winding through wood of ancient oak trees on its way to Woodle. That is the way for us, said Frodo. Not far from the road meeting, they came on the huge hulk of a tree. I need to drink water. I should have done that when I took a break. It was still alive and had leaves and the small branches that it had put out round the broken stumps of its long fallen limbs, but it was hollow, and could be entered by a great crack on the side way from the road. The hobbits crept inside, and sat there upon a floor of old leaves and decayed wood. They had rested and had a light meal, talking quietly and listening from time to time. Twilight was about them as they crept back to the lane. The west wind was sighing in its branches. Leaves were whispering. Soon the road began to fall gently but steadily into the dusk. A star came out above the trees in the darkening east before them. They went abreast and in a step, to keep up their spirits. After a time, as the stars grew thicker and brighter, the feeling of disquiet left them, and they no longer listened for the sound of hoofs. They began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing when they walk along, especially when they are drawing near to home at night. With most hobbits it is a supper song or a bed song, but these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed. Bilbo Baggins had made up the words to a tune that was as old as the hills, and taught it to Frodo as they walked in the lanes of the Water Valley and talked about adventure. Upon the hearth a fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed, but not yet weary are our feet. Still round the corner we may meet a sudden tree or standing stone that none have seen but we alone. Tree and flower and leaf and grass, let them pass, let them pass. Hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still round the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate. And though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way, and take the hidden paths that run towards the moon or to the sun, apple, thorn, and nut and sloe. Let them go, let them go. Sand and stone and pool and dell, fare you well, fare you well. Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread. Through shadows to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Then, world behind and home ahead, we'll wander back home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shall fade, away shall fade. Fire and lamp and meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed. The song ended. And now to bed, and now to bed, sung Pippin in a high voice. Hush, said Frodo, I think I hear hoofs again. They stopped suddenly and stood as silent as tree shadows, listening. There was a sound of hoofs in the lane some way behind, but coming slow and clear down the wind. Quickly and quietly they slipped off the path and ran into the deeper shade under the oak trees. Don't let us get too far, said Frodo. I don't want to be seen, but I want to see if it's another Black Rider. Very well, said Pippin. Don't forget the sniffing. The hoofs drew nearer. They had no time to find any hiding place better than the general darkness under the trees. Sam and Pippin crouched behind a large tree bole while Frodo crept back a few yards towards the lane. It showed grey and pale, a line of fading light through the wood. Above it the stars were thick in the dim sky, but there was no moon. The sound of hoofs stopped. As Frodo watched, he saw something dark pass across the lighter space between the two trees and then halt. It looked like the black shade of a horse led by a smaller black shadow. The black shadow stood close to the point where they had left the path, and it swayed from side to side. Frodo thought he heard the sound of snuffing. The shadow bent to the ground and then began to crawl toward him. Once more the desire to slip on the ring came over Frodo, but this time it was stronger than before. So strong that, almost before he realized what he was doing, his hand was groping in his pocket. But at that moment there came a sound, like a mingled song and laughter. Clear voices rose and fell in the starlit air. The black shadow straightened up and retreated. It climbed onto the shadowy horse, and seemed to vanish across the lane into the darkness on the other side. Frodo breathed again. "Elves!" exclaimed Sam in a hoarse whisper. "Elves, sir!" He would have burst out of the trees and dashed off toward the voices if they had not pulled him back. "Yes, it is elves," said Frodo. "One can meet them sometimes in the woody end. They don't live in the Shire, but they wander into it in the spring and autumn, out of their own lands away beyond the Tower Hills. I am thankful that they do. You did not see, but that Black Rider stopped just here and was actually crawling towards us when the song began. As soon as he heard the voices, he slipped away." "What about the elves?" said Sam, too excited to trouble about the rider. "Can't we go and see them?" "Listen, they are coming this way," said Frodo. "We have only to wait." The singing drew nearer. One clear voice rose now above the others. It was singing in the fair elven tongue of which Frodo knew only a little, and the others knew nothing. Yet the sound blending in with the melody seemed to shape itself in their thought into words which they only partly understood. This was the song, as Frodo heard it. Snow White, O Lady clear, O Queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here amid the world of woven trees. Githoniel, O Elbereth, clear are thy eyes and bright thy breath. Snow White, we sing to thee in a far land beyond the sea. O stars that in the sunless year with shining hand by her were sown, in windy fields now bright and clear we see your silver blossom blown. O Elbereth Githoniel, we still remain, we who dwell in this land far beneath the trees, thy starlight on the western seas. Okay, let's talk about the elves here and their song. So we're gonna meet them, of course, but this song here is really interesting because it gives you a little bit of the Silmarillion. Just like in The Hobbit, there was a paragraph in The Hobbit that basically summarized the history of the elves, the Quenta Silmarillion. And we get more than just that in The Lord of the Rings, of course, because The Lord of the Rings is even more connected into the Silmarillion because it was revised to be so before it was published, whereas The Hobbit, not so much. The main thing here is Githoniel, Elbereth Githoniel, referring to Varda. She is the queen of the Valar, Manwë's wife. She created the stars. And you're hearing about this, that she created the stars. They mentioned the sunless year, because when Middle-earth was created, when the world was created, there were these great two lamps, one in the north and one in the south of Middle-earth, and they lit the world. And then Melkor came along and he broke the towers and he smashed the lamps up and he put the world into darkness. And the Valar had a war with him, the War of the Valar, the first war in the world. And it was a war of terraforming, of changing the lands, and the shape of the world, the shape of the land masses became drastically different. And it became closer to what we see in The Lord of the Rings. Mountains are brought up, brought down. It was just this terrifying ordeal that went on for many long years. And eventually, they won. The Valar, that is. And they went to the Undying Lands, which was sort of a piece of Middle-earth that had broken off in the war and gone across the sea and became a continent called Aemon. And, well, not just Aemon. There were little islands there, the biggest of which is called Tol Eressëa. But these are the Undying Lands. And they went there to create something like what they had, but had been ruined. Because previous to this was something called the Spring of Arda. Arda is the world. And knowing Tolkien, it's sort of his way of saying the Garden of Eden. And it has been ruined. It's not that way anymore. The lamps were destroyed. The land was marred. Melkor put his power into the land, his taint upon the world. So they went off to a place where there would be no taint, where there would be no death and no decay and no aging and no strife. And eventually they took as many of the elves as would come with them to go there, and they made the great trees. But before the elves awoke, though, when they were leaving, Varda had this thought: Middle-earth is going to be dark. They created the two trees in the country that they made for themselves there, which was called Valinor. And they created the two trees, the golden tree Laurelin, the silver tree Tel Perion. And they would wax and wane, and they would create sort of a day and night. But that was only in the Undying Lands. Their light did not reach Middle-earth. So Varda had this thought that the children of Iluvatar, starting with the elves, were going to awaken in darkness. So the stars already were there, but she created more of them, and she made them brighter so that the elves would have light. Because there was no day and night in Middle-earth. There was only night. There was endless night until the sun and the moon were created far later. But earlier than this, in the sunless year, which is really the sunless years, the years of the trees, Middle-earth was dark. So elves sort of have this worshipful relationship with the stars. And because they love the stars, they also just love things that are associated with nighttime. And we see it again and again. They love the stars. They love the moon. They love the dusk. They don't hate daytime. They don't hate the sun. They love that too. But to them, the stars, the moon, these are all very special. Even the ones that lived in Valinor, there were the two trees, the silver and the gold. They preferred the silver, the one that was like the nighttime. And the sun was a fruit of the golden tree, and the moon was a flower of the silver tree. And we'll, of course, when we read the Silmarillion, we'll get into this in great detail. But you're getting a little tiny bit of it, hints of it here, and there's more to come in The Lord of the Rings, right here in Chapter 3. Okay, to move on. The song ended. "These are high elves. They spoke the name of Elbereth," said Frodo in amazing. "Few of the fairest folk have ever seen in the Shire. Not many now remain in Middle-earth, east of the Great Sea. This is indeed a strange chance." The hobbit sat in the shadow by the wayside. Before long the elves came down the lane toward the valley. They passed slowly, and the hobbits could see the starlight glimmering on their hair and in their eyes. They bore no lights, yet they walked a shimmer, like the light of the moon upon the rim of the hills before it rises, seemed to fall about their feet. They were now silent, and at the last elf passed, he turned and looked toward the hobbits and laughed. "Hail, Frodo!" he cried. "You are abroad late, or are you perhaps lost?" Then he called aloud to the others, and all the company stopped and gathered round. "This is indeed wonderful," they said. "3 hobbits in a wood at night. We have not seen such a thing since Bilbo went away. What is the meaning of it?" "The meaning of it, fair people," said Frodo, "is simply that we seem to be going the same way as you are. I like walking under the stars, but I would welcome your company." "But we have no need of other company, and hobbits are so dull," they laughed. "And how do you know that we go the same way as you, for you do not know whither we are going?" "And how do you know my name?" asked Frodo in return. "We know many things," they said. "We have seen you often before with Bilbo, though you may not have seen us." "Who are you, and who is your lord?" asked Frodo. "I am Gildor," answered their leader, the elf who had first hailed him. "Gildor and Glorian of the house of Finrod. We are exiles, and most of our kindred have long ago departed, and we, too, are now only tarrying here a while ere we return over the great sea. But some of our kinsfolk dwell still in peace in Rivendell. Come now, Frodo, tell us what you are doing, for we see that there is still some shadow of fear upon you." "O wise people," interrupted Pippin eagerly, "tell us about the Black Riders." "Black Riders," they said in low voices. "Why do you ask about Black Riders?" "Because 2 Black Riders have overtaken us today, or one has done so twice," said Pippin. "Only a little while ago he slipped away as you drew near." The elves did not answer at once, but spoke together softly in their own tongue. At length Gildor turned to the hobbits. "We will not speak of this here," he said. "We think you had best come now with us. It is not our custom, but for this time we will take you on our road, and you shall lodge with us tonight if you will." "O fair folk, there is good fortune beyond my hope," said Pippin. Sam was speechless. "I thank you indeed, Gildor and Glorian," said Frodo, bowing. "Elensir la lumen, omentil levo. A star shines in the hour of our meeting," he added in the high elven speech. "Be careful, friends," cried Gildor, laughing. "Speak no secrets. Here is a scholar in the ancient tongue. Bilbo is a good master. Hail, elf friend," he said, bowing to Frodo. "Come now with your friends and join our company. You had best walk in the middle, so that you may not stray. You may be weary before we halt." "Why, where are we going?" asked Frodo. "For tonight we go to the woods, on the hills above Woodhole. It is some miles, but you shall have rest by the end of it, and you will shorten your journey tomorrow." They now marched on again in silence, and passed like shadows and faint lights, for elves, even more than hobbits, could walk when they wished without sound or footfall. Pippin soon began to feel sleepy, and staggered once or twice, but each time a tall elf at his side put out his arm and saved him from a fall. Sam walked along at Frodo's side as if in a dream, with an expression on his face half of fear and half of astonished joy. So let's talk about Gildor a little bit, specifically his parentage. So Gildor in Glorian mentions that he is of the house of Finrod. And if you're reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time, or if you happen to be in the chat or watching this on YouTube, hearing The Lord of the Rings for the first time, you may wonder what that means. It just sounds like nonsense. Gildor and Glorian of the House of Finrod. What's the House of Finrod? So Finrod was actually Galadriel's brother, one of her brothers. She had 3 brothers. They all perished. That doesn't mean to say that they're dead, as elves are fully immortal and do not, in fact, die in the way that they do not pass from the world. They do return to life. But Finrod died in a very specific way. He fought Sauron. And the method of battle against Sauron that he chose was singing, which was a poor idea for Finrod. He really should not have done that. He might have had better luck if he had tried to fight him physically, but he thought a battle of magical singing would be fine. Sauron completely annihilated him, sang him to death. And the reason that he was able to do that is because Sauron is one of the Ainur, the angels. Ainur, in the Elvish tongue, translates to holy ones. We would understand them as angels, and he's specifically of a race called the Maiar, which means the beautiful ones. Yeah, he went down to Georgia, exactly. I want that to exist now. Sauron went down to Georgia. So, that being said, Sauron has the ability to use the Ainu Lindala, which translates to Music of the Holy Ones. And this is the song of creation, the song that created the world, and it is in fact what the first chapter of the Silmarillion is called, Ainu Lindala. And what I'm basically saying is, if you're fighting an angel, don't choose singing as your weapon. You will lose, and that is what happened to Finrod. But anyway, Finrod was a pretty important person, except for the fact that that's not who he's referring to. Now, we don't know exactly, when you say you're of the house of Finrod, the understanding here is that you are related to that person in some way, shape, or form. However, keep in mind that the Silmarillion was not published yet at this point. So, when Gildor Inglorian says Finrod, who he really means is Fingon. And Fingon was one of the high kings of the Noldor. And he also died in a rather horrifying way during the fall of Gondolin. He was smitten by the axe of Gothmog, the lord of the Balrogs, and then the Balrogs stomped him into dust, and they sort of played with his body until there was nothing left. And, so that's what happened to him. Fingon is really interesting because he didn't do very well there, but he was called Finrod at one point, and later the names got shifted around, and the character that became Finrod was originally called Inglor. So you see a little bit of that there. Gildor Inglorian. So he's basically saying that he is the character that we would understand to be Finrod, and he's of the house of Fingon. But it all got changed around. It all got mixed and muddled together. And we really don't know who Gildor is. Gildor is one of the most mysterious of all the elves because he seems to be important. He mentions he's in exile, suggesting that he may have been one of the characters that walked across the Helcaraxa from the Undying Lands and came to Middle-earth. He may have been with Fingolfin and Turgon and Galadriel and all those people. And in that he is just kind of hanging out until he goes back. But we don't know who he is, really. We don't know how he's related to any of these very important characters. And keep in mind, I always have a problem with Finrod and Fingon. I always confuse the names, and I mix them up all the time. I guarantee you I will do it more and more and more. I'm not familiar with the character that you're making a reference to, J.R.R. Could you elaborate on that? You said it's a joke, but I don't quite get it. I'm not familiar with that character. But anyway, so Gildor is somehow related to Galadriel. Hello there. Can I say this right? Spielkab? Am I saying it right? How are you doing? And the only other time in The Lord of the Rings that we see him, other than right now, this scene that we're reading right now, is at the very end. It's mentioned that he's there sailing to the west with Elrond and Galadriel, and it's just mentioned that Gildor is there. Oh, thank you. I try. I always say if I'm not pronouncing your name right, please tell me, because I want to pronounce it right. So yeah, we don't know. I would imagine he's some sort of cousin of Galadriel's, related to her in some small way, but we don't know exactly what way it is. And I just accidentally closed the book, so now I gotta find my spot again. We're almost at the end of chapter 3. Here we are. The woods on either side became denser. The trees were now younger and thicker, and as the lane went lower, running down into a fold of the hills, there were as many deep breaks of hazel on the rising slopes at either hand. At last the elves turned aside from the path. A green ride lay among almost unseen through the thickets on the right, and this they followed as it wound away back up into the wooded slopes under the top of a shoulder on the hills that stood out into the lower land of the river valley. Suddenly they came out of the shadows of the trees, and before them lay a wide space of grass, grey under the night. On 3 sides the woods pressed upon it, but eastward the ground fell steeply, and the tops of the dark trees, growing at the bottom of the slope, were below their feet. Beyond, the lowlands lay dim and flat under the stars. Near at hand a few lights twinkled in the village of Woodle. The elves sat on the grass and spoke together in soft voices. They seemed to take no further notice of the hobbits. Frodo and his companions wrapped themselves in cloaks and blankets, and drowsiness stole over them. The night grew on, and the lights in the valley went out. Pippin fell asleep, pillowed on a green hillock. Away high in the east swung Renraith, the netted stars, and slowly above the mists red Borgul rose, glowing like a jewel of fire. Then by some shift of airs, and the mist was drawn away like a veil, and there leaned up, as he climbed over the rim of the world, the swordsman of the sky, Menelvagar with his shining belt. The elves all burst into song. Suddenly under trees a fire sprang up with a red light. "Come," the elves called to the hobbits, "come, now is the time for speech and merriment." Pippin sat up and rubbed his eyes. He shivered. "There is a fire in the hall and food for hungry guests," said an elf standing before him. Okay, I have to comment on that, but I also want to catch up on... He was a Sindarin elf in Dori... Oh, okay. Oh, yes. So, hold on one second. I think I know who you're talking about. Actually, now. Give me one moment here. Yes. This is... Okay, I know who you're talking about now. Yes, we have a Discord if anybody's interested. I had to bring up War of the Jewels here. Yeah, that was a character that was basically adapted out of the... Good reference. He was basically adapted out, like, basically in the earliest version of Beren and Luthien and the Tale of Tenuvial, there was this character that was actually Luthien's brother, and then he sort of got changed into this guy Daeron, who had a bit more of a sinister vibe, and then he wound up not winding up in the Silmarillion. He went through a few names as well, too. But I believe the idea of this character wound up becoming Maeglin, Eowl's son. Good reference, though. Good reference. Okay, so a few words were thrown out here. Borgul, Remarath, Menelvagar. These are actually constellations. And the elves are watching them. And all of the constellations in The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion are real constellations. And the only one that we could really say for sure we know... Well, there's 2 of them. One is Valakirka, the 7 stars. We know that's the Big Dipper. It's not mentioned here. But the one that we know that we can make a direct reference to here, Menelvagar, is Orion, because it mentions the shining belt. All right, we're going to continue here. At the south end of the greensward there was an opening. There the green floor ran on into the wood and formed a wide space like a hall, roofed by the boughs of trees. Their great trunks ran like pillars down each side. In the middle there was a wood fire blazing, and upon the tree pillars torches with lights of gold and silver were burning steadily. The elves sat round the fire upon the grass or upon sawn rings of old trunks. Some went to and fro bearing cups and pouring drink. Others brought food on heaped plates and dishes. "This is poor fare," they said to the hobbits, "for we are lodging in the greenwood far from our halls. If you are ever our guests at home, we would treat you better." "It seems to me good enough for a birthday party," said Frodo. Pippin afterward recalled little of either food or drink, for his mind was filled with the light upon the elf faces, and the sound of voices so various and so beautiful that he felt like in a waking dream. But he remembered that there was bread surpassing the savour of a fair white loaf to one who was starving, and fruits sweet as wild berries and richer than the tended fruits of gardens. He drained a cup that was filled with a fragrant draught, cool as a clear fountain, golden as a summer afternoon. Sam could never describe in words nor picture clearly to himself what he felt or thought that night, though it remained in his memory as one of the chief events of his life. The nearest he ever got was to say, "Well, sir, if I could grow apples like that, I would call myself a gardener." But it was the singing that went to my heart, if you know what I mean. Frodo sat, eating, drinking, and talking with delight, but his mind was chiefly on the words spoken. He knew a little of the elf speech, and listened eagerly. Now and again he spoke to those who served him, and thanked him in their own language. They smiled at him and said, laughing, "Here is a jewel among hobbits." After a while Pippin fell fast asleep, and was lifted up and borne away to a bower under the trees, where he was laid upon a soft bed, and slept the rest of the night away. Sam refused to leave his master. When Pippin had gone, he came and sat curled up at Frodo's feet, where at last he nodded and closed his eyes. Frodo remained long awake, talking with Gildor. They spoke of many things old and new, and Frodo questioned Gildor much about happenings in the wide world outside the Shire. The tidings were mostly sad and ominous, of gathering darkness, the wars of men, and the flight of the elves. At last Frodo asked the question that was nearest to his heart. "Tell me, Gildor, have you ever seen Bilbo since he left us?" Gildor smiled. "Yes," he answered, "twice. He said farewell to us on this very spot, but I saw him once again far from here." He would say no more about Bilbo, and Frodo fell silent. "You do not ask me or tell me much that concerns yourself, Frodo," said Gildor, "but I already know a little, and I can read more in your face and in the thought behind your questions. You are leaving the Shire, and yet you doubt that you will find what you seek or accomplish what you intend, or that you will ever return. Is not that so?" "It is," said Frodo. "But I thought my going was a secret known only to Gandalf and my faithful Sam." He looked down at Sam, who was snoring gently. "The secret will not reach the enemy from us," said Gildor. "The enemy," said Frodo. "Then you know why I am leaving the Shire." "I do not know for what reason the enemy is pursuing you," answered Gildor, "but I perceive that he is, strange indeed though that may be, seems to me. And I warn you that peril now, both before you and behind you, and upon either side." "You mean the riders? I feared they were servants of the enemy. What are the Black Riders? Has Gandalf told you nothing?" "Nothing about such creatures." "Then I think it is not time for me to say more, lest terror should keep you from your journey. For it seems to me that you have set out only just in time, if indeed you are in time. You must now make haste, and neither stay nor turn back, for the Shire is no longer any protection to you." "I cannot imagine what information could be more terrifying than your hints and warnings," exclaimed Frodo. "I knew that danger lay ahead, of course, but I did not expect to meet it in our own Shire. Can't a hobbit walk from the water to the river in peace?" "But it is not your own Shire," said Gildor. "Others dwelt here before hobbits were, and others will dwell here again when hobbits are no more. The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out." "I know. And yet it has always seemed so safe and familiar. What can I do now? My plan was to leave the Shire secretly and make my way to Rivendell, but now my footsteps are dogged before I even get to Buckland." "I think you should still follow that plan," said Gildor. "I do not think the road will prove too hard for your courage, but if you desire clearer counsel, you should ask Gandalf. I do not know the reason for your flight, and therefore I do not know by what means your pursuers will assail you. These things Gandalf must know. I suppose that you will see him before you leave the Shire." "I hope so, but that is another thing that makes me anxious. I have been expecting Gandalf for many days. He was to have come to Hobbiton the latest 2 nights ago, but he's never appeared. Now I'm wondering what can have happened. Should I wait for him?" Gildor was silent for a moment. "I do not like this news," he said at last. "That Gandalf should be late does not bode well. But it is said, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. The choice is yours, to go or wait." "And it is also said," answered Frodo, "go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both no and yes." "Is it indeed?" laughed Gildor. "Elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift, even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill. But what would you? You have not told me all concerning yourself, and how then shall I choose better than you? But if you demand advice, I will for friendship's sake give it. I think you should now go at once, without delay, and if Gandalf does not come before you set out, then I also advise this, do not go alone. Take such friends as are trusty and willing. Now You should be grateful, for I do not give this counsel gladly. The elves have their own labours and their own sorrows, and they are little concerned with the ways of hobbits or any other creatures upon earth. Our paths cross there seldom by chance or purpose. In this meeting there may be more than chance, but the purpose is not clear to me, and I fear to say too much. I am deeply grateful, said Frodo, but I wish you would tell me plainly what the Black Riders are. If I take your advice, I may not see Gandalf for a long while, and I ought to know what the danger is that pursues me. Is it not enough to know that they are servants of the enemy? Answered Gildor. Flee them. Speak no words to them. They are deadly. Ask no more of me. But my heart forebodes that, ere all is ended, you, Frodo, son of Drogo, will know more of these fell things than Gildor and Glorian. May Elbereth protect you. But where shall I find courage? Asked Frodo. That is what I chiefly need. Courage is found in unlikely places, said Gildor. Be of good hope. Sleep now. In the morning we shall have gone, but we will send our messages through the lands. The wandering companies shall know of your journey, and those that have power for good shall be on the watch. I name you Elfriend, and may the stars shine upon the end of your road. Seldom have we had such delight in strangers, and it is fair to hear the words of the ancient speech from the lips of underwaterers of this world. Frodo felt sleep coming for him, even as Gildor finished speaking. I will sleep now, he said, and the elf led him to a bower beside Pippin, and he threw himself upon a bed and fell at once into a dreamless slumber. Have to take a break. My throat is very raw right now. Aside from the reading, I have been suffering allergies quite a bit lately. Fall is the worst time for allergies for me. Gotta wait for that first frost to kill all the what do you call it, the ragweed around here. One second. So that is actually the end of the third chapter. It's like I said, Gildor is a very interesting character. He's a very mysterious character. We never really get any sort of definitive answer as to who he actually is in relation to other elves. Usually there's some sort of genealogy. Even with the most mysterious elves, like Legolas, for example, is quite mysterious. We know the name of Legolas' father, though. And we then know the name of his grandfather. And we can strongly surmise that his grandfather was in some way related to Eleuthingel. So we can connect Legolas and his father Thranduil to a greater network of great Sindar elves. Gildor, we can connect in indirect ways. He says he's of the House of Fingon. We see him with Galadriel at the end. We know he must be related to her in some way. He's a cousin, a nephew, some sort of thing like that. I mean, originally he was intended to be a nephew, but that got changed over time when he was in Glor. But anyway, yeah. Interesting character. We don't hear from him again until the very, very end of The Lord of the Rings in Book 6. We're going to move on to our fourth chapter, which is called A Shortcut to Mushrooms, which this is a very, very short chapter, so we won't take very long. Now, I think we had gotten into this a little bit already, but hobbits love mushrooms. All of them love mushrooms. And this is a little bit of the author coming through. Oh, okay, what film was that? Tolkien saw himself as a kind of hobbit, other than his height. He said that he loved simple pleasures, simple foods, and especially mushrooms. Now, to me, I think mushrooms are disgusting. I can't eat them. I think they're vile. I don't like the way they look. I don't like the way they smell. I don't like the way they feel. And I certainly don't like the way they taste. There's nothing about mushrooms to me that is appealing. But we learn a little bit about Frodo and his past, and how mushrooms in this chapter is pretty interesting. In the morning, Frodo woke refreshed. He was lying in a bower made by the living tree, with branches laced and drooping to the ground. His bed was of fern and grass, deep and soft, and strangely fragrant. The sun was shining through the fluttered leaves, which were still green upon the tree. He jumped up and went out. Sam was sitting on the grass near the edge of the wood. Pippin was standing, studying the sky and weather. There was no sign of the elves. "They have left us fruit and drink and bread," said Pippin. Come and have your breakfast. The bread tastes almost as good as it did last night. I did not want to leave you any, but Sam insisted. Frodo sat down beside Sam and began to eat. What is the plan for today? Asked Pippin. To walk to Bucklebury as quickly as possible, answered Frodo, and gave his attention to the food. Do you think we shall see anything of those riders? Asked Pippin cheerfully. Under the morning sun, the prospect of seeing a whole troop of them did not seem very alarming to him. Yes, probably, said Frodo, not liking the reminder. But I hope to get across the river without them seeing us. Did you find out anything about them from Gildor? Not much. Only hints and riddles, said Frodo evasively. Did you ask about the sniffing? We didn't discuss it, said Frodo with his mouth full. You should have. I'm sure it is very important. In that case, I'm sure Gildor would have refused to explain it, said Frodo sharply. And now leave me in peace for a bit. I don't want to answer a string of questions while I'm eating. I want to think. Good heavens, said Pippin. At breakfast? He walked away toward the end of the green. You like mushrooms? Most people I seem to like mushrooms. I mean, there's a few people I know who don't like mushrooms, but I really don't like them. They're like anathema to me. And I'm somewhat of an adventurous eater who likes to try different things, but definitely nothing with fungus in it. From Frodo's mind, the bright morning, treacherously bright, he thought, had not banished the fear of pursuit, and he pondered the words of Gildor. The merry voice of Pippin came to him. He was running on green turf and singing. No, I could not, he said to himself. It is one thing to take my young friends walking over Shire with me, until we're hungry and weary and food and bed are sweet. To take them into exile where hunger and weariness may have no cure is quite another, even if they are willing to come. The inheritance is mine alone. I don't think I ought to even take Sam. He looked at Sam Gamgee and discovered that Sam was watching him. Well, Sam, he said, what about it? I am leaving the Shire as soon as I ever can. In fact, I've made up my mind now to not even wait a day at Crickhollow if it can be helped. Very good, sir. You still mean to come with me? I do. It is going to be very dangerous, Sam. It is already dangerous. Most likely neither of us will come back. If you don't come back, sir, then I shan't, that's for certain, said Sam. Don't you leave him, they said to me. Leave him, I said. I never mean to. I'm going with him if he climbs to the moon. And if any of those black riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with, I said. They laughed. Who are they, and what are you talking about? The elves, sir. We had some talk last night, and they seemed to know you were going away, so I didn't see the use of denying it. Wonderful folk, elves, sir. Wonderful. They are, said Frodo. Do you like them still, now that you've had a closer view? They seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak, answered Sam slowly. It don't seem to matter what I think about them. They're quite different from what I expected. So old and young, and gay and sad, as it were. Frodo looked at Sam rather startled, half expecting to see some outward sign of the odd change that seemed to have come over him. It did not sound like the voice of the old Sam Gamgee that he thought he knew, but it looked like the old Sam Gamgee sitting there, except that his face was unusually thoughtful. Do you feel any need to leave the Shire now that your wish to see them has come true already? He asked. Yes, sir. I don't know how to say it, but after last night I feel different. I seem to see ahead in a kind of way. I know we're going to take a very long road into darkness. But I know I can't turn back. It isn't to see elves now, nor dragons, nor mountains that I want. I don't rightly know what I want. But I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir, if you understand me. Yes, Sam was only pretending to be sleeping, exactly. He even snored. Sam is... We're going to find this out in the next chapter. Sam is really sneaky at times. Sam is... He's got a sneaky streak to him. I don't altogether, but I understand that Gandalf chose me as a good companion. I am content we will go together. Frodo finished his breakfast in silence. Then, standing up, he looked over the land ahead and called to Pippin. All ready to start, he said as Pippin ran up. We must be getting off at once. We slept late, and there are a good many miles to go. You slept late, you mean, said Pippin. I was up long before, and we're only waiting for you to finish eating and thinking. I have finished both now, and I'm going to make for Bucklebury Ferry as quickly as possible. I'm not going out of the way, back to the road we left last night. I'm going to cut straight across country from here. Then you are going to fly, said Pippin. You won't cut straight on foot anywhere in this country. We can cut straighter than the road anyway, answered Frodo. The ferry is southeast from Woodle, but the road curves away to the left. You can see a bend of it away north over there. It goes round the north end of the Marish as to strike the causeway from the bridge above the stock. But that is miles out of the way. We could save a quarter of the distance if we make a line for the ferry where we stand. Short cuts make long delays, argued Pippin. The country is rough round here, and there are bugs and all kinds of difficulties down in the marish. I know the land in these parts, and if you're worrying about black riders, I can't see that it is any worse meeting them on a road than in a wood or a field. It is less easy to find people in the woods and fields, answered Frodo, and if you're supposed to be on the road, there is some chance that you'll be looked for on the road and not off it. All right, said Pippin, I will follow you into every bog and ditch, but it is hard. I had counted on passing the Golden Perch at Stock before sundown, the best beer in the East Farthing, or it used to be. It is a long time since I tasted it. That settles it, said Frodo. Short cuts make delays, but inns make longer ones. At all costs we must keep you away from the Golden Perch. We want to get to Buckleberry before dark. What do you say, Sam? I'll go along with you, Mr. Frodo, said Sam, in spite of private misgivings and a deep regret for the best beer in the East Farthing. I seem to have lost my spot. Oh, here we are. Then if we're going to toil through bog and briar, let's go now, said Pippin. It was already nearly as hot as it had been the day before, but clouds were beginning to come up from the west. It looked likely to turn to rain. The hobbits scrambled down a steep green bank and plunged into thick trees below. Their course had been chosen to leave Woodle to their left, and to cut slanting through the woods that clustered along the eastern side of the hill until they reached the flats beyond. Then they could make straight for the ferry over country that was open, except for a few ditches and fences. Frodo reckoned they had 18 miles to go in a straight line. He soon found that the thicket was closer and more tangled than it had appeared. There were no paths in the undergrowth, and they did not get on very fast. When they had struggled to the bottom of the bank, they found a stream running down from the hills behind it in a deeply dug bed with steep, slippery sides overhung with brambles. Most inconveniently, it cut across the line they had chosen. They could not jump over it, nor indeed get across it at all without getting wet, scratched, and muddy. They halted, wondering what to do. First check, said Pippin, smiling grimly. Sam Gamgee looked back. Through an opening in the trees, he caught a glimpse of the top of the green bank from which they had climbed down. Look, he said, clutching Frodo by the arm. They all looked, and on the edge, high above them, they saw against the sky a horse standing. Beside it stooped a black figure. They at once gave up any idea of going back. Frodo led the way and plunged quickly into the thick bushes beside the stream. Phew, he said to Pippin, we were both right. The shortcut has gone crooked already, but we got under cover only just in time. You've got sharp ears, Sam. Can you hear anything coming? They stood still, almost holding their breath as they listened, but there was no sound of pursuit. I don't fancy he would try bringing his horse down that bank, said Sam, but I guess he knows we came down it. We had better be going on. Going on was not altogether easy. They had packs to carry, and the bushes and brambles were reluctant to let them through. They were cut off from the wind by the ridge behind, and the air was still and stuffy. When they forced their way at last into more open ground, longer certain of the direction in which they were going, the banks of the... Sorry about that. I need to drink water. The banks of the stream sank as it reached the levels and became broader and shallower, wandering off toward the marish and the river. Why, this is the Stock Brook, said Pippin. If we are going to try and get back on our course, we must cross at once and bear right. They waded the stream and hurried over a wide open space, rush-grown and treeless on the further side. Beyond that, they came again to a belt of trees, tall oaks for the most part, with here and there an elm tree or an ash. The ground was fairly level, and there was little undergrowth, but the trees were too close for them to see far ahead. The leaves blew upward in sudden gusts of wind, and spots of rain began to fall from the overcast sky. Then the wind died away, and the rain came streaming down. They trudged along as fast as they could over patches of grass and through thick drips of old leaves, and all about them the rain pattered and trickled. They did not talk, but kept glancing back and from side to side. After half an hour, Pippin said, Hope we have not turned too much to the south, and are not walking longwise through this wood. It is not a very broad belt. I should have seen no more than a mile at the widest, and we ought to have seen through it by now. It is no good our starting to go in zigzags, said Frodo. That won't mend matters. Let us keep on as we are going. I'm not sure that I want to come out into the open yet. They went on for perhaps another couple miles. Then the sun gleamed out of ragged clouds again, and the rain lessened. It was now past midday, but they felt it was high time for lunch. They halted under an elm tree. Its leaves, though fast turning yellow, were still thick, and the ground at its feet was fairly dry and sheltered. When they came to make their meal, they found that the elves had filled their bottles with a clear drink, pale golden in color. It had the scent of a honey made of many flowers, and was wonderfully refreshing. Very soon they were laughing and snapping their fingers at rain and at black riders. The last few miles, they felt, would soon be behind them. Frodo propped his back against the tree trunk and closed his eyes. Sam and Pippin sat near, and they began to hum, and then to sing softly. Ho, 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 to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go. But under a tall tree I will lie, and let the clouds go sailing by. Ho, 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 they began again louder. They stopped short suddenly. Frodo sprang to his feet. A long-drawn wail came down the wind like the cry of some evil and lonely creature. It rose and fell and ended on a high, piercing note. Even as they sat and stood, as if suddenly frozen, it was answered by another cry, fainter and further off, but no less chilling to the blood. Then there was a silence, broken only by the sound of the wind in the leaves. "And what do you think that was?" Pippin asked at last, trying to speak lightly but quavering a little. "If it was a bird, it was one that I never heard in the Shire before." "It was not bird or beast," said Frodo. "It was a call or a signal. There were words in that cry, though I could not catch them. But no hobbit has such a voice." No more was said about it. They were all thinking of the riders, but no one spoke of them. They were now reluctant either to stay or go on, but sooner or later they had to get across the open country to the ferry, and it was best to go sooner and in daylight. In a few moments they had shouldered their packs again and were off. Before long the wood came to a sudden end. Wide grassland stretched before them. They now saw that they had in fact turned too much to the south. Away over the flats they could glimpse the low hill of Buckleberry across the river, but it was now to their left. Creeping cautiously out from the edge of the trees, they set off across the open as quickly as they could. At first they felt afraid, away from the shelter of the wood. Far back behind them stood the high place where they had breakfasted. Frodo half expected to see the small distant figure of a horseman on the ridge, dark against the sky, but there was no sign of one. The sun escaping from the breaking clouds, as it sank toward the hills they had left, was now shining brightly again. Their fear left them, though they were still felt uneasy. The land became steadily more tame and well-ordered. Soon they came unto well-tended fields and meadows. There were hedges and gates and dikes for drainage. Everything seemed quiet and peaceful, just an ordinary corner of the Shire. Their spirits rose with every step. The line of the river grew nearer, and the black riders began to seem like phantoms of the woods now left far behind. They passed along the edge of a huge turnip field, and came to a stout gate. Beyond it a rutted lane ran between low, well-laid hedges toward a distant clump of trees. Pippin stopped. "I know these fields and this gate," he said. "We are on old Farmer Maggot's land. That must be his farm away there in the trees." "One trouble after another," said Frodo, looking nearly as much alarmed as if Pippin had declared the lane was the slot leading to a dragon's den. The others looked at him in surprise. "What's wrong with old Maggot?" asked Pippin. "He's a good friend to all the Brandybucks. Of course he's a terror to trespassers and keeps ferocious dogs, but after all, folk down here are near the border and have to be more on their guard." "I know," said Frodo. "But all the same," he added with a shamefaced laugh, "I am terrified of him and his dogs. I have avoided his farm for years and years. He caught me several times trespassing after mushrooms when I was a youngster at Brandy Hall. On the last occasion he beat me, and then he took me and he showed me to his dogs. 'See, lads,' he said, 'next time this young varmint sets foot on my land you can eat him. Now see him off.' They chased me all the way to the ferry. I have never got over the fright, though I dare say the beasts knew their business and would not really have touched me." Pippin laughed. "Well, it's time you made it up, especially if you're coming back to live in Buckland. Old Maggot is really a stout fellow, if you leave his mushrooms alone. Let's get to the lane, and then we shan't be trespassing. If we meet him, I'll do the talking. He's a friend of Mary's, and I used to come here with him a good deal at the time." Okay, so we learn a little bit of young Frodo there as this sort of troublemaker in Buckland. And what's interesting is that he must have been very young when this happened, because Frodo grew up in Buckland. His parents died when he was about 2 years old. They drowned in the river, and he was taken in by Rora Mac Brandybuck. And Rora Mac he lived with Roramac until he was 12, and that's when he came to live with Bilbo in Hobbiton. So he had to have been younger than 12. And if you think about, the lifespan of hobbits and the life cycle of hobbits, where they come of age at 33. So a 33-year-old hobbit is somewhat akin to an 18-year-old man, so to speak. Or if we're talking about the high men of Numenor, a 25-year-old man, but because the men of Numenor came of age at 25. But what's interesting, so he's 12, but don't think of it as a human 12. He's probably pretty little at this point. He might be like a 6 or 7-year-old to us, right? And he's off traipsing around in Farmer Maggot's land stealing his mushrooms. And Farmer Maggot says, I'll let my dogs eat you if you come back. And now he's 50 years old and he's still afraid. And I think this is a very real sort of passage for anyone who's had a good fright put into them when they were small. You remember that, when something really, really just scares the heck out of you when you're that little, you're going to remember it. There are people that I know who have fears of things that, happened to them when they were children. And I'm not talking about like absolutely terrible things. I'm talking about things that just, are a little scary, like somebody telling you he's going to feed you to his dogs, So you could imagine Frodo is still terrified. And if you think about it, it's, he had to be 12 or younger. Farmer Maggot is a funny name because it's like a maggot is a fly larva. Why would he be called that? But Tolkien said that most Hobbit names don't really mean much. Like we can glean the meaning of Samwise, but most of them just are, just funny sounding gibberish. When you think about it, Frodo being that young and now he's 50. There's no way these are the same dogs, right? There's no way that they're the same dog. Like, he has dogs still. He's probably always going to have dogs, but there's no way. It's been decades unless these are, like, unusually long-lived dogs. But I always found this section rather amusing. They went along the lane until they saw the thatched roofs of a large house and farm buildings peeping out among the trees ahead. The Maggots and the Pudderfoots of Stock and most of the inhabitants of the Marish were house-dwellers, and his farm was stoutly built of brick and had a high wall all round it. There was a wide wooden gate opening out into the wall of the lane. Suddenly, as they drew nearer, a terrific baying and barking broke out, and a loud voice was heard shouting, "Grip, Fang, Wolf, come on, lads!" Frodo and Sam stopped dead, but Pippin walked on a few paces. The gate opened and 3 huge dogs came pelting out into the lane and dashed toward the travelers, barking fiercely. They took no notice of Pippin, but Sam shrank against the wall, while 2 wolfish-looking dogs sniffed at him suspiciously and snarled if he moved. The largest and most ferocious of the 3 halted in front of Frodo, bristling and growling. Through the gate there now appeared a broad, thick-set hobbit with a round red face. "Hallo! Hallo! And who may you be, and what may you be wanting?" he asked. "Good afternoon, Mr. Maggot," said Pippin. The farmer looked at him closely. "Well, if it isn't Master Pippin, Mr. Peregrine Took, I should say," he cried, changing from a scowl to a grin. "It's a long time since I saw you round here. It's lucky for you that I know you. I was just going to set my dogs on any strangers. There are some funny things going on today. Of course, we do get queer folks wandering in these parts of times. Too near the river," he said, shaking his head. "But this fellow was the most outlandish I have ever set eyes on. He won't cross my land without leaving a second time, not if I can stop it." "What fellow do you mean?" asked Pippin. "Then you haven't seen him," said the farmer. "He went up the lane toward the causeway not a long while back. He was a funny customer, asking funny questions. But perhaps you'll come along inside and we'll pass the news more comfortable. I've a drop of good ale on tap, and if you and your friends are willing, Mr. Took." It seemed plain that the farmer would tell them more, if allowed to do so in his own time and fashion, so they all accepted the invitation. Wow, my phone is going absolutely berserk here. Let me just look at that and just make sure that there's nothing that I need to... He doesn't farm maggots. No, he actually farms mushrooms. But, just a bunch of alerts all kind of came through at once. Sort of. But it's always alarming when your phone pings that many times in a row. What about the dogs? Asked Frodo anxiously. The farmer laughed. They won't harm you, not unless I tell them to. Here, Grip, Fang, heel, he cried. Heel, Wolf. To the relief of Frodo and Sam, the dogs walked away and let them go free. Pippin introduced the other two to the farmer. Mr. Frodo Baggins, he said. You may not remember him, but he used to live at Brandy Hall. At the name Baggins, the farmer started, and he gave Frodo a sharp glance. For a moment, Frodo thought that the memory of stolen mushrooms had been aroused, and that the dogs would be told to see him off. But Farmer Maggot took him by the arm. Well, if that isn't queerer than ever, he exclaimed. Mr. Baggins, I said, come inside. We must have a talk. They went into the farmer's kitchen and sat by the wide fireplace. Mrs. Maggot brought out beer in a huge jug and filled 4 large mugs. It was a good brew, and Pippin found himself more than compensated for missing the golden perch. Sam sipped his beer suspiciously. He had a natural mistrust of the inhabitants of other parts of the Shire. And also he was not disposed to be quick friends with anyone who had beaten his master, however long ago. After a few remarks about the weather and the agricultural prospects, which were no worse than usual, Farmer Maggot put down his mug and looked at them all in turn. Now, Mr. Peregrine, he said, where might you be coming from, and where might you be going to? Were you coming to visit me? For if so, you've gone past my gate without me seeing you. Well, no, answered Pippin. To tell you the truth, since you have guessed it, we got into the lane from the other end. We had come over your fields, but that was quite by accident. We lost our way in the woods back near Woodle, trying to take a short-cut to the ferry. If you were in a hurry, the road would have served you better, said the farmer. But I wasn't worrying about that. You have leave to walk over my land if you have a mind, Mr. Peregrine, and you, Mr. Baggins, though I dare say you still like mushrooms. He laughed. Oh, yes, I recognize the name. I recollect the time when young Frodo Baggins was one of the worst young rascals of Buckland, but it wasn't mushrooms I was thinking of. I had just heard the name Baggins before you turned up. What do you think that funny customer asked me? They waited anxiously for him to go on. Well, the farmer continued, approaching his point with slow relish. He came riding on a big black horse in at the gate, which happened to be open, and right up to my door. All black he was himself, too, all cloaked and hooded up, as if he did not want to be known. Now, what in the Shire could he want, I thought to myself. We don't see many of the big folk around over the border, and anyway, I never heard of any like this black fellow. Good day to you, I says, going out to him. This lane don't lead anywhere, and wherever you may be going, your quickest way to be back to the road. I didn't like the looks of him. And when Grip came out, he took one sniff and he let out a yelp, as if he'd been stung. He put down his tail and bolted off howling. The blackfellow sat quite still. I come from yonder, he said, slow and stiff-like, pointing back over west. Over my fields, if you please. Have you seen Baggins? He asked in a queer voice, and bent towards me. I could not see any face, for his hood fell down so low, and I felt a sort of shiver down my back. But I did not see why he should come riding over my land so bold. Be off, I said. There are no Bagginses here. You're in the wrong part of the Shire. You'd better go back west to Hobbiton, but you can go by road this time. Baggins has left, he answered in a whisper. He is coming. He's not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes, will you tell me? I will come back with gold. No, you won't, I said. You'll go back where you belong double quick. I give you 1 minute before I call all my dogs. He gave sort of a hiss. It might have been laughing, and it might not. Then he spurred his great horse right at me, and I jumped out of the way only just in time. I called the dogs, but he swung off, and rode through the gate and up the lane toward the causeway like a bolt of thunder. What do you think of that? Frodo sat for a moment looking at the fire, but his only thought was how on earth would they reach the ferry? I don't know what to think, he said at last. Then I'll tell you what to think, said Maggot. You should never have gone mixing yourself up with Hobbiton folk, Mr. Frodo. Folk are queer up there. Sam stirred in his chair and looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye. But you were always a reckless lad. When I heard you had left the brandy box and gone off to that old Mr. Bilbo, I said that you were going to find trouble. Mark my words, this all comes of those strange doings of Mr. Bilbo's. His money was got in some strange fashion in foreign parts, they say. Maybe there's some that want to know what has become of the gold and jewels that he buried in the hills of Hobbiton, as I hear. Frodo said nothing. The shrewd guesses of the farmer were rather disconcerting. Well, Mr. Frodo, Maggot went on, I'm glad that you've had the sense to come back to Buckland. My advice is stay there and don't get mixed up with these outlandish folk. You'll have friends in these parts. If any of these black fellows comes after you again, I'll deal with them. I'll say you're dead or left the Shire or anything you like. And that might be true enough, for as like as not, it is old Mr. Bilbo they want news of. Maybe you're right, said Frodo, avoiding the farmer's eye and staring at the fire. Maggot looked at him thoughtfully. Well, I see you have ideas of your own, he said. It is as plain as my nose that no accident brought you and that rider here on the same afternoon, and maybe my news was no great news to you after all. I'm not asking you to tell me anything you have a mind to keep to yourself. But I see you're in some kind of trouble. Perhaps you are thinking, it won't be too easy to get to the ferry without being caught. I was thinking so, said Frodo, but we've got to try to get there, and it won't be done by sitting and thinking. So I'm afraid we must be going. Thank you very much indeed for your kindness. I've been in terror of you and your dogs for over 30 years, Farmer Maggot. Though you may laugh to hear it, it is a pity, for I've missed a good friend. And now I'm sorry to have to leave so soon, but I'll come back perhaps one day if I get a chance. You'll be welcome when you come, said Maggot. But now I've a notion. It's near sundown already, and we're going to have our supper, for mostly go to bed after the sun. If you and Mr. Peregrine and all could stay here and have a bite with us, we would be pleased. And so should we, said Frodo, but we must be going at once, I'm afraid. Even now it will be dark before we can reach the ferry. But wait a minute, I was going to say, after a bit of summer, I'll get out a small wagon and I'll drive you all to the ferry. That will save you a good step, and it might also save you trouble of another sort. Frodo now accepted the invitation gratefully, to the relief of Pippin and Sam. The sun was already behind the western hills, and the light was failing. 2 of Maggot's sons and his 3 daughters came in, and a generous supper was laid on the large table. The kitchen was lit with candles, and the fire was mended. Mrs. Maggot bustled in and out. 1 or 2 other hobbits belonging to the farm household came in. In a short while 14 sat down to eat. There was beer in plenty, and a mighty dish of mushrooms and bacon, besides much other solid farmhouse fare. The dogs lay by the fire and gnawed at rinds and cracked bones. When they had finished, the farmer and his sons went out with a lantern and got the wagon ready. It was dark in the yard when the guests came out. They threw their packs on boards and climbed in. The farmer sat in the driving seat and whipped up his 2 stout ponies. His wife stood at the light of the open door. You be careful of yourself, Maggot, she called. Don't go arguing with any foreigners, and come straight back. I will, said he, and drove out of the gate. There was now no breath of wind stirring. The night was still and quiet, and a chill was in the air. They went without lights and took it slowly. After a mile or 2 the lane came to an end, crossing a deep dike, and climbing a short slope up onto the high-banked causeway. Maggot got down and took a good look either way, north and south, but nothing could be seen in the darkness, and there was not a sound in the still air. Thin strands of river mist were hanging above the dikes and crawling over the fields. It's going to be thick, said Maggot. But I'll not light 9 lanterns until I turn for home. We'll hear anything on the road long before we meet it tonight. So to stop here for a moment, what's interesting here, and I talked about this last time, was when we were in Hobbiton, we were privy to a lot of these characters that live in Hobbiton and Bywater and the surrounding area there, talking about Bucklanders. They're queer folk, they're weirdos, they're strange, And then we get here and we see they're doing the same thing. Those Hobbiton people, they're off. They're quite off. And, and we see it with hobbits in general distrusting people from outside the Shire, but even from just different parts of the Shire. And you can see that even though this is a fantasy book, there's a bit of realism here about the way that people tribalize and sort of fall into these groups. And they think that anybody who's not like them, who might share a different culture or whatever, is doing it wrong. Now, Farmer Maggot here, he's not a bad person, of course. He's actually a good dude, but he says a lot of things. He's upsetting Sam the whole time, basically. He's got a little bit of a point about Bilbo, and he's very correct, though, that about one thing, that the Nazgul, the Black Riders, the Ring Wraiths, are actually looking for Bilbo. Because as far as they know, Bilbo has the ring. They don't know about Frodo. Now, Frodo happens to be Mr. Baggins, Master of Bag End, or at least he was Mr. Baggins, Master of Bag End, until he sold the place to his cousin, Lobelia. But it's just interesting that it's Frodo, not Bilbo, because I don't think the Nazgul, they're mortal men, but they're very, very old at this point. You know, you think about it, the One Ring was cast in 1600 of the Second Age. And the Nazgul didn't appear right away. But they did appear in the Second Age. And we're now over 3,000 years into the Third Age. And these guys have been around for a really long time. They're mortal, but they're kept alive, undead, sort of, through what basically amounts to necromancy. Sauron is the necromancer, after all. And the Rings of Power, they're bound to the Nine Rings. And the Nine Rings are bound to the One. And the One is bound to Sauron. And I don't think that they realize, they like, like, that Bilbo guy, that was 60 years ago. He might not still be around. However, there is a wisdom in this as well, because Bilbo hasn't really aged. He aged mentally. He said it himself. He doesn't look old, but he feels old. He feels thin. He's stretched. Like a little bit of butter scraped over a lot of bread. But so whoever holds the One Ring doesn't really age. Gollum didn't age. He became a creature over time, but he had the ring for hundreds of years. Frodo still looks 33. We covered that last time, that Frodo hasn't aged since he came into the ring. And he's not carrying it around usually. He's carrying it around now, but he kept it in a drawer. But just the fact that he owned it, that he had possession of it, was enough to halt his aging. People started, oh, that family has all the luck. That Bilbo, he's 111, he looked 50. Now look at this Frodo guy. He's 50, he looks 33. So we see this, that they're actually looking for Bilbo. It may not cross their mind that Bilbo would be very old, but it doesn't really matter. They do know that Bilbo has the One Ring, or at least they think he has the One Ring, because Bilbo never told Gollum his first name. He said, Mr. Baggins. So Sauron doesn't know Bilbo's first name. He doesn't know the name Bilbo. He knows the name Baggins. He knows the Shire. And it took him a long time to locate the Shire, because the Shire, what does the word Shire mean? It means country, the country. Everywhere is the country, right? Where is the Shire? Where hobbits dwell. Dane the Ironfoot wasn't telling them anything. They said, we'll give you 3 rings of power if you give up the location of one Mr. Baggins and where hobbits live. And, you know, I got to think about it. You know, you come back tomorrow. He kept stonewalling them. We'll learn about that in the beginning of book 2. What's not in the Lord of the Rings is they also went to Saruman. That's a little bit from Unfinished Tales here. They went to Saruman, and they went to Grima Wormtongue. And it was actually Grima Wormtongue that told them where the Shire is, because they learned, Saruman lied to them. Saruman told them, in the Vales of the Anduin, the Gladden Fields, that's where the ring was lost. There used to be hobbits there. A long time ago, there were stores there, 500 years ago. That's where Gollum's from. And in one version of the story, they were all long gone. The Nazgul went there, and they found remnants of old hobbit dwellings, but they didn't find any hobbits. In another version, there still were hobbits living there, and the Nazgul wiped them all out, but they did not find Baggins, and they came back to Isengard. Either way, they came back to Isengard, and they caught little Mr. Grima Wormtongue running around, and they put the screws to him, so to speak, and he gave it up. It's north of Dunland. So that's how they found the Shire. One person on Quora once asked me, well, how did they get into the Shire so easily when there's supposed to be a network of rangers guarding the Shire. And actually, that is actually covered in the appendix to The Lord of the Rings, that there was actually a fight. They did fight their way through, and the Rangers started pursuing some of the Nazgul, and the Nazgul essentially drew the Rangers away from the Shire, while some of them came into the Shire, and that's why all 9 of them aren't there. The Shire was only called this after the fall of Fornost and the defeat of the Witch King of Angmar. That is true, but what I'm saying, I mean, in their language, in the language that the Hobbits spoke, the Hobbitish dialect of Westron, they would call it the Suzat, which it's the same thing. It means the country. And if you think of the naming conventions of the Shire, it was founded by these guys from Bree, that they found this land in Arthedain that was basically untouched. Gildor said there were people there once in the past, but at this point there was nobody there. And they asked the king of Arthedain, could be settled there, and he said, sure, go ahead, nobody else is using that land. The only person or person-esque thing in any sort of like area near there was Bombadil, and I could talk about that for ages, but what I'm getting at here is that the Shire, it just means the country. What do they call the river? The river, the water, the road. Everything is very plain. Even the 4 parts of the Shire are basically the east, the west, the north, the south. They don't really have very good names. Hobbiton. It's where hobbits dwell, right? There are names, of course. I mean, you hear these names, Woodle and Stock and such. The capital of the Shire is a place called Meikle Delving, which is probably somebody named Meikle Delved there at some point. And it's very, very British. Yeah, Hobbiton, Hobbit Town, exactly. Bywater, it's by the water. It's all very literal, and it's a very British way of saying, like, Upton on the sea, like that kind of thing. Everything's named very literally. So when they say I'm from the Shire, that's like saying, well, I live in the country. Shire is an English way of saying the country. Suzat is the Hobbiton. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Leicestershire is Leicester country. There's lots of shires in England and even in New England. So, like I said, hobbits are very interesting in the way that they name things. Even Tom Bombadil, who came up with that name? Like Old Tom, right? It was actually Farmer Maggot that came up with that. Elrond calls him Iarwen Ben Adar, which means eldest and fatherless. Iarwen, the eldest, Ben Adar, without father. So yeah, it's just interesting the way that hobbits name things, and that's why there's this meme that goes about hobbits naming their children. They have daughters, and they name them like Rose and Lavender and Lily and Petunia, all these floral names. And then here are my sons, Drogo and Bingo and Bilbo and Frodo and Peregrine and Meriadoc and Odo and Lotho. They all have these like sort of like weird names that don't really mean much. Samwise means something. And it's interesting, Aragorn, when he was king, wrote a letter to the Shire, and he wrote it in... calm down, Moogle. He wrote it in Gondor or Sindarin, and he refers to Sam as Perhale, which is the way that you would say his name in Sindarin, but remarks that he ought to be called Panhale. And you might think, well, what do those mean? Perhale, Panhale, Samwise, Perhale. Sam, in Old British slang, means half. And wise, obviously wisdom, they're saying half-wise. And basically, he was named Halfwit, which is interesting, because he's not a book smart character, but he has a lot of common sense, So Panhale would mean full wise. Aragorn's saying that he should not have been called Samwise because he's not a half-wit, Yeah, well, the Hobbits of Buckland. So it was a farmer maggot. It may not have been this particular farmer maggot. There's a little book I have here. Where is it? Here it is. The Tolkien sampler, or Tolkien reader, I should say. And in this, there's a little bit called The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. I'll show you right there. Adventures of Tom Bombadil. And it's not so much a story of Tom Bombadil. The full title is The Adventures of Tom Bombadil and Other Verses from the Red Book. And these are all poems. It's a collection of poems. And the first one is called The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. And there are other ones. And it's believed that some of these, like Bombadil Goes Boating, for example, were written by hobbits. And there's sort of these infabled ideas of what Bombadil is like. For example, Farmer Maggot being present at his wedding to Goldberry, which is, a Farmer Maggot. Do we know that he's the Farmer Maggot? There's a mention of Bombadil having an uncle. He doesn't have an uncle. That poem was probably written by Sam. There's a poem called Errantry here that was written by Bilbo about a knight fighting bumblebees and all sorts of ridiculous notions. And it's believed that, Bilbo went off when he was young, when he was 50, on his adventure, and he stayed in Rivendell for a time, and he heard all these tales from the elves of the First Age. And he didn't take it seriously, and he sort of wrote this whimsical version. The man in the moon stayed up too late. The man in the moon came down too soon. The stone troll. Perry the Winkle. Princess Me, the Mulips. Oliphant. That's a poem that's in The Return of the King, Sam said. So there's all these like whimsical hobbit poems. There's one that's just called Cat. Okay, yes, Tom was based off of a Dutch doll that the Tolkiens had. That, he was this like little gnomish figure with a beard and a blue coat and yellow hat. And Michael Tolkien really didn't like this doll, and he tried to flush it down the toilet at one point, and it clogged up the toilet. So that's where the inspiration for Bombadil came from, out of universe. But yeah, he does mention, we're not going to get to Tom Bombadil today. There's no way. But Bombadil mentions that Tom Bombadil is what the hobbits of Buckland called him. Like I said, the elves call him Yarwin Ben Adar. There's probably other people that call him other things. It's just interesting about how connected to hobbits he is. I've written a very large paper about the origin of hobbits, which if you're on my Quora, you can go to my answers, and it's the pinned answer, the origin of hobbits. And I definitely connect them to Bombadil. Yeah, tried to flush Tom down the toilet, clogged up the whole thing, made a huge mess from my understanding. Michael Tolkien really didn't like that doll. Okay. I think at least we could finish a shortcut to mushrooms. The next chapter after that is Conspiracy Unmasked. Maybe we can get through that. That's not a long one either. I'd like to get through 3 chapters. Yeah, poor Tom. He turned out all right, though. But yeah, the doll left a very big impression on Tolkien's kids, obviously. So he wrote a bunch of poems about Tom Bombadil, and he put them in The Lord of the Rings. It was 5 miles or more from Maggot's Lane to the ferry. The hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears were strained for any sound above the creak of the wheels and the slow clop of the pony's hoofs. The wagon seemed slower than a snail to Frodo. Beside him, Pippin was nodding towards sleep, but Sam was staring forwards into the rising fog. They reached the entrance to the ferry lane at night, at last. It was marked by 2 tall white posts that suddenly loomed up on their right. Farmer Maggot drew his ponies, and the wagon creaked to a halt. They were just beginning to scramble out when suddenly they heard what they had all been dreading. Hoofs on the road ahead. The sound was coming toward them. Maggot jumped down and stood, holding the ponies' heads and peering forward into the garden. Clip, clop came the approaching rider. The fall of the hoofs sounded loud in the still, foggy air. "You'd better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down in the wagon and cover up with blankets, and we'll send this rider to the rigabouts. To the rightabouts, rather." He climbed up and went to the farmer's side. Black riders would have to ride over him to get near the wagon. Clop, clip, Clop, clop. The rider was nearly on them. "Hello there," called Farmer Maggot. The advancing hoof stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark cloaked shape in the mist, a yard or two ahead. "Now then," said the farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward. "Don't you come a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going?" "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" said a muffled voice. But the voice was the voice of Mary Brandybuck. A dark lantern was uncovered, and its light fell on the astonished face of the farmer. "Mr. Merry!" he cried. "Yes, of course. Who did you think it was?" said Merry, coming forward. As he came out of the mist, and their fears subsided, he seemed suddenly to diminish to ordinary hobbit size. He was riding a pony, and a scarf was swathed around his neck and over his chin to keep out the fog. Frodo sprang out of the wagon to greet him. "So there you are at last," said Merry. "I was beginning to wonder if you would turn up at all today. And I was just going back to supper. When it grew foggy, I came across and rode up to the stock to see if you had fallen in any ditches. But I'm blessed if I know which way you've come. Where did you find them, Mr. Maggot? In your duck pond?" "No, I caught 'em trespassing," said the farmer, "and nearly set my dogs on 'em, but they'll tell you the story, I've no doubt. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Merry, Mr. Frodo and all, I'd best be turning for home. Mrs. Maggot'll be worritin' the night getting thick." He backed the wagon into the lane and turned it. "Well, good night to you all," he said. "It's been a queer day, and no mistake, but all's well that as ends well, though perhaps we should not say that till we reach our own doors. I'll not deny that I'll be glad now when I do." He lit his lanterns and got up. Suddenly he produced a large basket from under the seat. "I was nearly forgetting," he said. "Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins, with her compliments." He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light round his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising. All right, let me go ahead and catch up on here again. It's just the English word. There's no... He even said that maggot is meaningless in the realm of Middle-earth. It doesn't mean anything, so it's literally just he probably thought it sounded funny. I think that, when you think of the author's conceit being that some guy called Elfwine came across the straight road from the Undying Lands and reached Albion, England. And he had the Red Book of Westmarch, and he handed it to a certain Mr. Tolkien, and Tolkien translated it from the various languages that it was written in into English. So I think when he's going through these names and translating them, he comes up with some weird stuff like Bilboa becomes Bilbo, Maura becomes Frodo, and such and such and such. And I think he just wanted it all to sound very British because he thought of the hobbits as a British sort of folk. And so, a guy named Maggot, it just sounds British, Yeah. So that's really what it is. I think he just liked the way it sounded. I mean, I don't think he's literally saying the guy is like a filthy little grub, But when you think about it, there is some sort of connection with mushrooms, I suppose, right? But I think Tolkien just thought it was amusing. If you understand his sense of humor, he does use words that he just thinks are funny. All right, so I think we can get through Chapter 5 today. It's not a very long chapter. So we're going to get through the Chapter 5, which is called A Conspiracy Unmasked. Oh, absolutely. Let me actually tell you. So Tolkien, he wrote a children's story called Mr. Bliss. It's a picture book for young children. I recommend you give it a look if you ever found it. It's about this man who goes out in his little car and he has all these sort of wild adventures. And it was actually based off of Tolkien did not like the idea of cars. But when he got behind the wheel, he basically thought of the car as a horse and himself as a knight. And there was a line in a Stephen King book that I think applies to Tolkien. He couldn't drive, but he could aim the car. And basically he banged it all up. And his wife would be in the passenger seat screaming, "Stop, what are you doing? You're driving right into people." And And he would look at her and he'd go, "If I charge, they'll scatter." You know, he was a very funny man. Him and C.S. Lewis once showed up to a party dressed as polar bears. It was not a costume party. It was supposed to be like a fancy dinner party. He would dress up like a Viking and run at his neighbors with an axe, shouting in Old Norse. You know, Tolkien was a really funny guy. And his humor comes through most clearly with hobbits in their ways, you know. Like I said, in the last stream we talked about it, Merry absolutely roasting Frodo when Lobelia says to Frodo, "You're not even a Baggins, you're half a Brandybuck." And, you know, of course, Merry is Merry Brandybuck, and he turns to Merry and he says, "You hear that, Merry?" And Merry says, "It was a compliment, and therefore untrue." Tolkien was a funny man. He had a lot of good humor to him, you know. I mean, just think about, like, if you lived next to this famous author and you just saw him out there with an axe one day, you know, just running at people, screaming in Old Norse. He was a professor. He would come in and to his classroom and shout lines in Old English from Beowulf, and his students were expected to bellow back the next line in Old English as well. I mean, imagine going to a class like that, you know, studying Old English texts like Beowulf, and the teacher is just that into it. You know, I always found when learning, you learn the best when the teacher really loves what he's teaching or what they're teaching. And that's always been my interpretation of learning and teaching. And yeah, with Tolkien, he loved those old texts. There was another bit about dwarfs, because in English it has always been dwarfs, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And Tolkien, this is a bit of a shibboleth, and he wrote himself about a shibboleth of Feanor, who would change the way that Sindarin was spoken. For example, Isildur is a Sindarin name, basically Moonchild. Ithil is the moon. Feanor would be the guy that basically created the shibboleth of TH and S, and thinking that one was better than the other. If you ever read the book Morgoth's Ring, there's a section called the Shibboleth of Feanor, and he basically changed the language of Sindarin because he just didn't like the way it was. He thought he could improve it, and Tolkien did the same thing. A little bit of Tolkien and Feanor, which is scary because Feanor is such an evil character, but Tolkien is the reason that we say dwarves, because he thought that sounds right. It's elves, why would it be dwarves with a V? And he would get these notes from his editor. That's not right, it's dwarves. And he would say, no, it's not, it's dwarves. He said, check the dictionary. He goes, I wrote the dictionary. Which is at least partially true. Where's that book? Oh, there it is. And I have this book that Alice in the chat actually got me this last Christmas. It's an excellent read. Which is The Ring of Words, Tolkien in the Oxford English Dictionary. So he did work on the dictionary. So I wrote the dictionary. And that's why The Hobbit has another, yes, dwarfs is the proper thing, but in this world it's dwarves. And these days, how often do you hear anybody say dwarfs? You might use it as a verb, like this one dwarfs the other. But in referring to plural, dwarves, it just sounds natural. He invented the word tween. We say tween all the time now, but that was his word. All right, Chapter 5, A Conspiracy Unmasked. Now we had better get home ourselves, said Merry. Last Christmas. Yeah, and it was that book. They turned down the ferry lane, which was straight and well kept and edged with large whitewashed stones. In 100 yards or so, it brought them to the riverbank, where there was a broad wooden leading stage. Oh, I see what you're doing. Okay. A large, flat berry boat was moored beside it. The white bollards near the water's edge glimmered in the light of 2 lamps on high posts. Behind them, the mists of the flat fields were now above the hedges, but the water before them was dark, with only a few curling wisps like steam among the reeds by the bank. There seemed to be less fog on the further side. Mary led the pony over a gangway onto the ferry, and the others followed. Mary then pushed slowly off with a long pole. The Brandywine flowed slow and broad before them. On the other side, the bank was steep, and up it a winding path climbed from the further landing. Lamps were twinkling there. Behind it loomed up the Buck Hill, and out of it, through stray mounds of mist, shone many round windows, yellow and red. They were the windows of Brandy Hall, the ancient home of the Brandybucks. Long ago, Gorhadad Oldbuck, head of the Oldbuck family, one of the oldest in the Marish, or indeed in the Shire, had crossed the river, which was the original boundary of the land eastward. He built and excavated Brandy Hall and changed his name to Brandybuck, and settled down to become master of what was virtually a small independent country. His family grew, and after his days continued to grow until Brandy Hall occupied the whole of Low Hill, and had 3 large front doors, many side doors, and about 100 windows. The Brandybucks and their numerous dependents then began to burrow, and later to build all round that. That was the origin of Buckland, a thickly inhabited strip between the river and the old forest, a sort of colony from the Shire. Its chief village was Bucklebury, clustering in the banks and slopes behind Brandy Hall. The people in the Marish were friendly with the Bucklanders, and the authority of the master of the hall, as head of the Brandybuck family was called, was still acknowledged by the farmers between Stock and Rushy. Most of the folk of the old Shire regarded the Bucklanders as peculiar, half foreigners, as it were, though, as a matter of fact, they were not very different from the other hobbits of the Four Farthings. Except in one point, they were fond of boats, and some of them could swim. Their land was originally unprotected from the east, but on that side they built a hedge, the High Hay. It had been planted many generations ago and was now thick and tall, for it was constantly tended. It ran all the way from Brandywine Bridge in a big loop curving away down the river to Haysend, where the Withywindle flowed out of the forest into the Brandywine, well over 20 miles from end to end. But of course it was not a complete protection. The forest drew close to the hedge in many places. The Bucklanders kept their doors locked after dark, and that was also not usual in the Shire. The ferry boat moved slowly across the water. The Buckland shore drew nearer. Sam was the only member of the party who had not been over the river before. He had a strange feeling as the slow, gurgling stream slipped by. His old life lay behind in the mists. Dark adventure lay in front. He scratched his head, and for a moment had a passing wish that Mr. Frodo could have gone on living quietly at Bag End. The 4 hobbits stepped off the ferry. Merry was tying it up, and Pippin was already leading the pony up the path, when Sam, who had been looking back as if to take farewell of the Shire, said in a hoarse whisper, "Look back, Mr. Frodo. Do you see anything?" On the far stage, under the distant lamps, they could just make out a figure. It looked like a dark, black bundle left behind, but as they looked it seemed to move and sway this way and that, as if searching the ground. It then crawled or went crouching back into the gloom beyond the lamps. "What in the Shire is that?" exclaimed Merry. "Something that is following us," said Frodo. "But don't ask any more now. Let's get away at once." They hurried up the path to the top of the bank, but when they looked back the far shore was shrouded in mist and nothing could be seen. "Thank goodness you don't keep any boats on the west bank," said Frodo. "Can horses cross the river?" "They can go 20 miles north to the Brandywine Bridge, or they might swim," answered Merry, "though I've never heard of any horse swimming the Brandywine. But what if horses have to do with it?" "I'll tell you later. Let's get indoors, so then we can talk." "All right, you and Pippin know your way, and I'll just ride on and tell Fatty Bulger that you're coming. We'll see about supper and things." "We had our supper early with Farmer Maggot," said Frodo, "but we could do with another." "You shall have it. Give me that basket," said Merry, and rode ahead into the darkness. It was some distance between the Brandywine to Frodo's new house at Crickhollow. They passed Buck Hill and Brandy Hall on their left, and on the outskirts of Bucklebury struck the main road of Buckland that rounds south from the bridge. Half a mile northward along this they came to a lane opening on their right. This they followed for a couple of miles as it climbed up and down onto the country. At last they came to a narrow gate in a thick hedge. Nothing could be seen of the house in the dark. It stood back from the lane in the middle of a wide circle of lawns surrounded by a belt of low trees inside the outer hedge. Frodo had chosen it because it stood in an out-of-the-way corner of the country, and there was no other dwellings close by. You could get in and out without being noticed. It had been built a long while before by the Brandybucks for the use of guests or members of the family that wished to escape from the crowded life of Brandy Hall for a time. It was an old-fashioned countrified house, as much like a hobbit hole as possible. It was long and low, with no upper story, and it had a roof or turf, round windows, and a large round door. As they walked up the green path from the gate, no light was visible. The windows were dark and shuttered. Frodo knocked on the door, and Fatty Bulger opened it. A friendly light streamed out. They slipped in quickly and shut themselves in the light inside. They were in a wide hall with doors on either side. In front of them, a passage ran back down the middle of the house. "Well, what do you think of it?" asked Merry, coming up the passage. "We've done our best in a short time to make it look like home. After all, Fatty and I only got back here with the last cartload yesterday." Frodo looked round. It did look like home. Many of his own favorite things, or Bilbo's things, they reminded him sharply of him in their new setting, were arranged as nearly as possible as they had been at Bag End. It was a pleasant, comfortable, welcoming place, and he found himself wishing he was really coming here to settle down in quiet retirement. It seemed unfair to have put all his friends to all this trouble, and he wondered again how he was going to break the news to them that he must leave them so soon, indeed at once. Yet they would have to be done that very night before they all went to bed. "It is delightful," he said with an effort. "I hardly feel that I have moved at all." The travelers hung up their cloaks and piled up their packs on the floor. Merry led them down the passage and threw open a door at the far end. Firelight came out and a puff of steam. "A bath!" cried Pippin. "Oh, blessed Meriadoc!" "Which order shall we go in?" said Frodo. "Eldest first or quickest first? You'll be last either way, Master Peregrine." "Trust me to arrange things better than that," said Merry. "We can't begin life at Crickhollow with a quarrel over baths. In that room there are 3 tubs and a copper full of boiling water. There are also towels, mats, and soap. Get inside and be quick." Merry and Fatty went into the kitchen on the other side of the passage and busied themselves with the final preparations for a late supper. Snatches of competing songs came from the bathroom, mixed with the sound of splashing and wallowing. The voice of Pippin was suddenly lifted up above the others in one of Bilbo's favorite bath songs. "Sing hey for the bath at close of day that washes the weary mud away. A loon is he that will not sing, O water hot as a noble thing. Oh, sweet is the sound of falling rain, and the brook that leaps from hill to plain. But better than rain or rippling streams is water hot that smokes and steams. Oh, water cold we may pour at need down a thirsty throat and be glad indeed. But better is beer if drink we lack, and water hot poured down the back. Oh, water is fair that leaps on high in a fountain white beneath the sky, but never did fountain sound so sweet as splashing hot water with my feet." There was a terrific splash and a shout of "Whoa!" from Frodo. It appeared that a lot of Pippin's bath had imitated a fountain and leaped on high. Merry went to the door. "What about supper and beer in the throat?" he called. Frodo came out, drying his hair. "There's so much water in the air that I'm coming into the kitchen to finish," he said. "Look," said Merry, looking in. The stone floor was swimming. "You want to mop all that up before you've anything to eat, Peregrine," he said. "Hurry up or we shan't wait for you." They had supper in the kitchen, on a table near the fire. "I suppose you 3 want mushrooms again," said Fredegar without much hope. "Yes, we shall," said Pippin. "They're mine," said Frodo. "Given to me by Mrs. Maggot, a queen among farmers' wives. Take your greedy hands away, and I'll serve them." Hobbits have a passion for mushrooms, surpassing even the greediest likings of big people, a fact which partly explains young Frodo's long expeditions to the renowned fields of the Marish and the wrath of the injured maggot. On this occasion there was plenty for all, even according to Hobbit standards. There were also many other things to follow, which they had finished. Even Fatty Bulger heaved a sigh of content. They pushed back the table and drew chairs around the fire. "We'll clear up later," said Merry. "Now tell us all about it. I guess that you've been having adventures, which was not quite fair without me. I want a full account, and most of all I want to know what was the matter with old Maggot and why he spoke to me like that. He sounded almost as if he was scared, if that is possible." "We have all been scared," said Pippin after a pause, in which Frodo stared at the fire and did not speak. "You would have been too if you'd been chased for 2 days by black riders." "What are they?" "Black figures riding on black horses," answered Pippin. "If Frodo won't talk, I'll tell you the whole tale from the beginning." He then gave a full account of the journey from the time when they left Hobbiton. Sam gave various supporting nods and exclamations. Frodo remained silent. "I should think you were making it all up," said Merry. "If I had not seen that black shape on the landing stage and heard the queer sound in Maggot's voice. What do you make of it all, Frodo?" "Cousin Frodo has been very close," said Pippin. "But the time has come for him to open out. So far we've given nothing more to go on than Farmer Maggot's guess that it has something to do with old Bilbo's treasure." "That was only a guess," said Frodo hastily. "Maggot does not know anything." Old Maggot is a shrewd fellow, said Merry. A lot goes on behind his round face that does not come out in his talk. I've heard that he used to go into the old forest at one time, and he had the reputation of knowing a good many strange things. But you can at least tell us, Frodo, whether you think his guess good or bad. So, there you hear the hint of what I spoke of earlier. There's a lot more to Maggot than meets the eye. He goes into the old forest. He knows Tom Bombadil. He gave him that name, or at least a farmer Maggot called him that. I think the Maggot family has probably known Bombadil for a long time. I think, answered Frodo slowly, that it was a good guess as far as it goes. There is a connection with Bilbo's old adventures, and the riders are looking, or perhaps one ought to say searching for him or for me. I also fear, if you want to know, that it is no joke at all, and that I am not safe here or anywhere else. He looked round at the windows and walls as if he was afraid they would suddenly give way. The others looked at him in silence and exchanged meaning glances among themselves. It's all coming out in a minute, whispered Pippin to Merry. Merry nodded. Well, said Frodo at last, sitting up and straightening his back as if he had made a decision. I can't keep it dark any longer. I have got something to tell you, but I don't know quite how to begin. I think I should help you, said Merry quietly, by telling you some of it myself. What do you mean, said Frodo, looking at him anxiously. Just this, my dear old Frodo, you are miserable because you don't know how to say goodbye. You mean to leave the Shire, of course, but danger has come on you sooner than you expected, and now you are making your mind to go at once. And you don't want to. We're very sorry for you. Frodo opened his mouth and shut it again. His look of surprise was so comical that they laughed. Dear old Frodo, said Pippin, did you really think that you had thrown dust in all our eyes? You have not been nearly careful or clever enough for that. You have obviously been planning to go and saying farewell to all your haunts all this year since April. We have constantly heard you muttering, shall I ever look down upon that valley again, I wonder, and things like that, and pretending that you had to come to the end of your money and actually selling your beloved Bag End of those Sackville Bagginses and all those close talks with Gandalf. Good heavens, said Frodo, I thought I had been both careful and clever. I don't know what Gandalf would say. Is all the Shire discussing my departure, then? Oh, no, said Merry. Don't worry about that. The secret won't keep for long, of course, but at present it is, I think, only known to us conspirators. After all, you must remember that we know you very well and are often with you. We can usually guess what you're thinking. I knew Bilbo, too. To tell you the truth, I have been watching you rather closely ever since he left. I thought you would go after him sooner or later. Indeed, I expected you to go sooner. And lately we've been very anxious. We have been terrified that you might give us the slip and go off suddenly, all on your own like he did. Ever since this spring, we have kept our eyes open and done a good deal of planning on our own account. You are not going to escape so easily. But I must go, said Frodo. It cannot be helped, dear friends. It is wretched for us all. But it is no use your trying to keep me. Since you've guessed so much, please help me and do not hinder me. You do not understand, said Pippin. Pocket dust, yeah. Pocket dust, sha-sha-sha. That's a good one. You must go, and therefore we must too. Merry and I are coming with you. Sam is an excellent fellow, and he would jump down a dragon's throat to save you, if he did not trip over his own feet, but you will need more than one companion in your dangerous adventure. My dear and most beloved hobbit, said Frodo, deeply moved. But I could not allow it. I decided that long ago, too. You speak of danger, but you do not understand. This is no treasure hunt, no there-and-back journey. I'm fleeing from deadly peril into deadly peril. Of course we understand, said Merry firmly. That is why we have decided to come. We know the ring is no laughing matter, but we're going to do our best to help you against the enemy. The ring, said Frodo, now completely amazed. Yes, the ring, said Merry. My dear old hobbit, you don't allow for the inquisitiveness of friends. I have known about the existence of the ring for years, before Bilbo went away, in fact. But since he obviously regarded it as secret, I kept the knowledge in my head until we formed our conspiracy. I did not know Bilbo, of course, as well as I know you. I was too young, and he was also more careful. But he was not careful enough. If you want to know how I first found out, I will tell you. Go on, said Frodo faintly. It was the Sackville Bagginses that were his downfall, as you might expect. One day a year before the party, I happened to be walking along the road when I saw Bilbo ahead. Suddenly in the distance the SBs appeared, coming towards us. Bilbo slowed down, and then, hey presto, he vanished. I was so startled that I hardly had the wits to hide myself in a more ordinary fashion, but I got through the hedge and walked along the field inside. I was peeping into the road after the SBs had passed, and I was looking straight at Bilbo when he suddenly reappeared. I caught a glint of gold as he put something back in his trouser pocket. After that I kept my eyes open. In fact, I confess that I spied.
But you must admit that it is very intriguing, and I was only in my teens. I must be the only one in the Shire besides you, Frodo, that has ever seen the old fellow's secret book." "You've read his book?" cried Frodo. "Good heavens above, is nothing safe?" "Not too safe, I should say," said Merry. "But I have only one rapid glance, and that was difficult to get. He never left the book about. I wonder what became of it. I should like another look. Have you got it, Frodo?" "No, it was not at Bag End. He must have taken it away." "Well, as I was saying," Merry proceeded, "I kept my knowledge to myself till the spring when things got serious. Then we formed our conspiracy. And as we were serious too and meant business, we have not been too scrupulous. You're not a very easy nut to crack, and Gandalf is worse. But if you want to be introduced to our chief investigator, I can produce him." "Where is he?" said Frodo, looking round as if he expected a masked and sinister figure to come out of a cupboard. "Step forward, Sam," said Merry, and Sam stood up with a face scarlet up to the ears. "Here's our collector of information, and he collected a lot, I can tell you, before he was finally caught. After which, I may say, he seemed to regard himself as on parole and dried up." "Sam!" cried Frodo, feeling that amazement could go no further, and quite unable to decide whether he felt angry, amused, relieved, or merely foolish. "Yes, sir," said Sam. "Begging your pardon, sir, but I meant no wrong to you, Mr. Frodo, nor to Mr. Gandalf for that matter. He had some sense, mind you, and when you said go alone, he said no, take someone you can trust." "But it does not seem I can trust anyone," said Frodo. Sam looked at him unhappily. "It all depends on what you want," put in Merry. "You can trust us to stick to you through thick and thin, to the bitter end. And you can trust us to keep a secret of yours, closer than you keep it yourself. But you cannot trust us to let you face trouble alone and go off without a word. We're your friends, Frodo. Anyway, there it is. We know most of what Gandalf has told you. We know a good deal about the ring. We are horribly afraid, but we're coming with you or following you like hounds." "After all, sir," added Sam, "you did ought to take the elves' advice. Gildor said you should take them as was willing, and you can't deny it." "I don't deny it," said Frodo, looking at Sam, who was now grinning. "I don't deny it, but I'll never believe you are sleeping again, whether you snore or not. I shall kick you hard to make sure." "You are a set of deceitful scoundrels," he said, turning to the others. "But bless you," he laughed, getting up and waving his arms. "I give in. I will take Gildor's advice. If the danger were not so dark, I should dance for joy. Even so, I cannot help feeling happy. Happier than I felt for a long time. I have dreaded this evening." Okay, let's pause here. So as you can see, I told you we would get to how sneaky Sam actually is. He was pretending to sleep. He was even snoring. He was gathering information. He was dropping eaves. Sneaky Sam dropping eaves, right? I love the idea that Merry found out about the ring because of the Sackville Bagginses, because Bilbo wasn't using the ring all that often in the Shire, but yeah, definitely to hide from those guys. I'm not dealing with these guys. He sees them coming up the road. Not today. Puts the ring on. Good, that's settled. 3 cheers for Captain Frodo and company, they shouted, and they danced round him. Merry and Pippin began a song, which they had apparently got ready for the occasion. It was made on the model of the dwarf song that started Bilbo on his adventure long ago and went to the same tune. "Farewell, we call to hearth and hall, though wind may blow and rain may fall. We must away ere break of day for over wood and mountain tall. To Rivendell, where elves yet dwell, and glades beneath the misty fell. Through moor and waste we ride in haste, and whither then we cannot tell. With foes ahead, behind us dread, beneath the sky shall be our bed, until at last our toil be past, our journey done, our errand sped. We must away, we ride before the break of day." "Very good," said Frodo. "But in that case, there are a lot of things to do before we go to bed, under a roof for tonight at any rate." "Oh, that was poetry," said Pippin. "Do you really mean to start before the break of day?" "I don't know," answered Frodo. "I fear those Black Riders, and I am sure it is unsafe to stay in one place long, especially in a place to which it is known I was going. Also, Gildor advised me not to wait. But I should very much like to see Gandalf. I could see that even Gildor was disturbed when he heard that Gandalf had never appeared. It really depends on 2 things. How soon could the riders get to Bucklebury? And how soon could we get off? It will take a good deal of preparation." "The answer to the second question," said Merry, "is that we could get off in an hour. I have prepared practically everything. There are 6 ponies in a stable across the field. Stores and tackles are all packed, except for a few extra clothes and the perishable food." Okay, so I need to stop here. Notice something that he said. 6 ponies. You might think, 6? Why 6? Frodo? Sam? Merry, Pippin, Fatty. That's 5. Fatty doesn't even go with them. In the very, very earliest iteration of The Lord of the Rings, it was a tale of 6 hobbits. Bingo was the lead character. Bingo Baggins, who later was renamed Frodo. There was Bingo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, Fatty, and Trotter. Trotter was a hobbit who was known for walking long distances to the point where he had worn his feet away and he had artificial feet. And Trotter was actually cut out of the story and reworked into a different character with a similar name. He became Strider, also known as Aragorn. But what's interesting about it is that this reference to 6 ponies stay there. And even though, like I said, Fatty's not going to go with them. At this point, they think Fatty's going to go with them. He's going to decline. He's going to stay in Frodo's house and pretend to be Frodo for a while, which actually turns out to be the smart thing to do, so that people don't really realize he's gone. He won't go into the old forest. He fears that. And but Trotter was originally part of the story. So Trotter became Strider in the later revisions. He became a man named Strider. But originally, in the very earliest versions, it was a local story. It took place, in the north part of Middle-earth, concerning 6 hobbits. It grew in the telling. And there were characters that were added. There were characters that were subtracted. Trotter was subtracted. The 6 pony is a bit of an anomaly. We could say that perhaps a pony for each hobbit and then one to carry all the bags, like a pack horse, perhaps. That would be the in-universe explanation as to why there are 6 ponies. The out-of-universe explanation is that there was another character that was cut from the story. Yeah. I'll have you, Longshanks. Yeah. I would call you Wingfoot, is what Éomer said to him. Okay, where were we? The bit about 6 ponies, right? Here we are. It seems to have been a very efficient conspiracy, said Frodo. But what about the Black Riders? Would it be safe to wait one day for Gandalf? That all depends on what you think the Riders would do if they found you here, answered Merry. They could have reached here by now, of course, if they were not stopped at the north gate, where the hedge runs down the river bank, just this side of the bridge. The gate guards would not let them through by night, though they might break through. Even in the daylight they would try to keep them out, I think, at any rate until they got message through to the master of the hall. For they would not like the look of the riders, and would certainly be frightened by them. But of course Buckland cannot resist a determined attack for long, and it is possible that in the morning even a black rider that rode up and asked for Mr. Baggins would be let through. It's pretty generally known that you're coming back to live at Crickhollow. Frodo sat for a while and thought. I've made up my mind, he said finally. I'm starting tomorrow as soon as it is light, but I am not going by road. It would be safer to wait here than that. If I go through the north gate, my departure from Buckland will be known at once, instead of being secret for several days at least, as it might be. And what is more, the bridge and the east road near the borders will certainly be watched, whether any rider gets into Buckland or not. We don't know how many there are, but there are at least 2, and possibly more. The only thing to do is to go off in a quite unexpected direction. But that can only mean going into the old forest, said Fredegar, horrified. You can't be thinking of doing that. It is quite as dangerous as black riders. Not quite, said Merry. It sounds very desperate, but I believe Frodo was right. It is the only way of getting off without being followed at once. With luck we might get a considerable start. But you won't have any luck in the old forest, objected Fredegar. No one ever has any luck in there. You get lost. People don't go in there. Oh, yes, they do, said Merry. The Brandybucks go in occasionally when the fit takes them. We have a private entrance. Frodo went in once long ago. I've been in several times, usually in daylight, of course, when the trees are sleepy and fairly quiet. Well, do as you think best, said Fredegar. I am more afraid of the old forest than of anything I know about. The stories about it are a nightmare, but my vote hardly counts, as I'm not going on the journey. Still, I'm very glad someone is stopping behind who could tell Gandalf what you have done. When he turns up, I am sure he will before long. Fond as he was of Frodo, Fatty Bilger had no desire to leave the Shire, nor to see what lay outside it. His family came from the East Farthing, from Budgeford and Bridgefields, in fact. But he had never been over the Brandywine Bridge. His task, according to the original plans of the conspirators, was to stay behind and deal with inquisitive folk, and to keep up as long as possible the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still living at Crickhollow. He had even brought along some old clothes of Frodo's to help him in playing the part. They little thought of how dangerous that part might prove. Excellent, said Frodo, when he understood the plan. We could not have left any message behind for Gandalf otherwise. I don't know whether those riders can read or not, of course, but I should not have dared to risk a written message in case they got in and searched the house. But if Fatty is willing to hold the fort, and I can be sure of Gandalf knowing the way that we have gone, that decides me. I'm going into the Old Forest first thing tomorrow. Well, that's that, said Pippin. On the whole, I would rather have our job than Fatty's, waiting here till Black Riders come. You wait till you're well inside the forest, said Fredegar. You'll wish you were back here with me before this time tomorrow. There's no good arguing about it any more, said Merry. We've still got to tidy up and put the finishing touches of the packing before we get to bed. I shall call you all before the break of day. When at last he had gone to bed, Frodo could not sleep for some time. His legs ached. He was glad that he was riding in the morning. Eventually he fell into a vague dream in which he seemed to be looking out of a high window over a dark sea of tangled trees. Down below, among the roots, there was the sound of creatures crawling and snuffling. He felt sure they would smell him out sooner or later. Then he heard a noise in the distance. At first he thought it was a great wind coming over the leaves of the forest. Then he knew that it was not leaves, but the sound of the sea far off, a sound he had never heard in waking life, though it had often troubled his dreams. Suddenly he found that he was out in the open. There were no trees at all. He was on a dark heath, and there was a strange salt smell in the air. Looking up, he saw before him a tall, white tower, standing alone on a high ridge. A great desire came over him to climb the tower and see the sea. He started to struggle up the ridge toward the tower, but suddenly a light came in the sky, and there was a noise of thunder. And that's that chapter. Yeah. They hadn't figured out they could... See, Sam would let them do that. That's the thing. Sam would absolutely... Frodo wouldn't allow it. Frodo would be like, no, we cannot do that to Sam. But Sam would be like, yes, you could. Yes, you could, Mr. Frodo. I could carry it all. The dream is really interesting. So my belief here, because this is never explained, is that the tower that he's talking about is not that far off from where he is right now. It's not that far off from the Shire. It is the tower near Lindon. And Lindon is by the sea. That's where the Grey Havens are. And that is where Círdan keeps his Palantir, the Seeing Stone. And I think that that's what he's thinking about. And this is sort of foreshadowing, in my mind, of Frodo's eventual fate. That he's never heard the sea before in waking life. He's never been to the ocean. He doesn't know what the sea sounds like, what it looks like, what it smells like. But still he's filled with this urge to climb a tower and to see the Belagir Sea. And I think this is sort of going on a foreshadowing of his eventual fate, that he is going to go across the sea and that he is going to go to the Undying Lands. It is sort of a form of the unquiet of Ulmo, the sea longing. And I think that Ulmo, out of all the Valar, is the one that the most communicates with mortals. The only one of the Valar, other than Melkor, who any mortal men have ever seen and spoken to, and the ones that spoke to Melkor really wish they hadn't. But he is present in all water in Middle-earth. Now, his power weakened over time, but he's still out there looking and watching and manipulating things. And I said earlier that, in relation to the proximity to water and stuff like that, because wherever there's water, there's Ulmo. Why else would the Nazgul be afraid of going over water? It doesn't, make a lot of sense. They're wraiths. Why would they care about water? It's the same reason that when Frodo speaks to the Nazgul later on in Book 1, and he says the name of Elbereth Githoniel, Varda, he invokes the name of the Valar, and Gandalf even says that was, I think it was Aragorn actually, that said that was more deadly to them than anything he could have done with any weapon. When you're a creature like the Nazgul, or even like Gollum, things that are really good and pure and holy are sort of anathema. Gollum could not eat the elvish way bread. It tasted like ashes and dust in his mouth. He couldn't touch things made by the elves. It burned him and froze him, and he hated it. Like the elvish rope that they tied him up with. He couldn't even enter Lothlorien. He said the smell of the trees there was disgusting to him. So we see this a lot where good holy things are the anathema of evil base things. And I think that that's why water comes off as very purifying in a lot of sense, because Ulmo, who is one of the Valar, and my favorite of the Valar, actually, the one I like to talk about the most, is present in all water in Middle-earth, and all water in outside of Middle-earth as well. All water in the world he's present in. And I think that, the sea longing was his way to the unquiet of Ulmo to make the elves want to go to Eldamar. And, we saw it happen to Legolas later on. Without even seeing the sea, he just heard the baying of the gulls, and he was never the same. Galadriel warned him against the baying of the gulls. But it also happened to a mortal once, Tur. And Tur wound up being the only mortal-born man with no elvish ancestry whatsoever who became immortal. Just as Luthien was the only immortal elf with no mortal blood at all to become mortal. They sort of think of it as two ships taking the same path in different directions. And Tolkien in his letter said that only God, only Ilúvatar could have done this. The Valar don't have this power. The Valar could make animals immortal. They could make plants immortal. They cannot make the children of Ilúvatar immortal. So what we see here is Frodo getting a little bit of a hint of this. He's not necessarily filled with the urge to sail to the west, but especially in this first book, the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring, we see Frodo having prophetic dreams quite a bit. And it happens up to the point where he stays with Bombadil, and a little bit beyond that, and then it just kind of stops. And I think that we have a little bit of Ulmo here, and in relation to water, and Goldberry being hey Laurel, haying. We're just about to end, but thank you for speaking up. Goldberry is also associated with water. She's the daughter of the river woman. And she's, Bombadil in her house, he surrounds her with pots full of water, with lilies. Her washing day, she goes out and it rains, torrential downpour. And Bombadil calls it her washing day, and then he comes in from the rain. He's completely dry. She has complete control over water in that sense. So you see this, the sea and water, Ulmo, Bombadil, Ilúvatar, it's all sort of coalescing here. And the closer that Frodo gets to Bombadil, the more prophetic dreams he has. And he actually, we're going to get to it next month when we do the Fellowship of the Ring again. He actually has a dream where he's Gandalf, and it doesn't make sense in context. But then going back and reading it, knowing where Gandalf is, he actually connects with Gandalf, because at this moment, the reason that Gandalf is not there, he's locked up in Orthanc. He's in Isengard on the top of the tower, and Frodo dreams about that. Yeah, because Gandalf was up there for a few days. It wasn't like in the movies where it was only for a few minutes. It seemed like it was for a few minutes where they're fighting, and then Saruman sends him up there, and then it shows them fighting on the tower, and then Gandalf drops off of it, and he's on Gwaihir's back, and they fly away. He was up there for a few days in the book. So, I didn't know you were traveling. Well, happy travels there. So is Frodo. Frodo's traveling as well. He's not going to any place as pleasant as Tennessee, though. He's headed to Mordor eventually. But, right now he's heading to Rivendell eventually. But you notice that the prophetic dreams happen mostly in Book 1, mostly around Bombadil. It already started. It started right here. He has a dream going up the tower. It's a different sort of prophecy. He's not seeing through Gandalf's eyes. He's not seeing events that will happen or may happen or have happened. He's getting a hint of something to come, of going to the sea. And that's how the book ends, with Frodo going to the sea, passing over the sea into the Undying Lands. So that's interesting. Anyway, that's all that we have time for today. We went pretty late, as I typically do with these reading streams. So thank you all for coming by. For those of you that followed, for those of you that subscribed, for those of you that joined the server, I see you there, Nabi. I'll have the mods, if you could just put in one more link to the Discord server for anyone who wants to join. We're going to go over the schedule here and then do a raid. So everyone, I ask you to not leave just yet, to stick around through the schedule. Keep in mind that I do stream every day, but I do Tolkien streams twice monthly on Thursday nights. So, but I'm going to give you the next week or so of gaming streams, and then we'll talk about when the next Tolkien streams are going to be. I have to go over to the gaming section here, though. Oh, here we are. Yeah, Oblivion was yesterday. We're not playing Oblivion. So tomorrow afternoon, we will be playing Chrono Cross Radical Dreamers Edition for Steam, which is one of my favorite games of all time. This is a game that I love to talk. If you want to hear me talk about more lore, the lore of Chrono Cross is pretty interesting, and also the complicated systems in it. So that's a fun game that we just started. That's tomorrow afternoon. Saturday night, we'll be playing more of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Speaking of a game with amazing lore, although this is my first playthrough, so I don't have that much to say. I'm experiencing it for the first time. That's on the Switch. Sunday night, we'll be continuing along with more of Castlevania Judgment on the Wii. Monday afternoon, I don't quite have the scene. I know it says Capcom vs. SNK 2. We finished that. We're going to play Onimusha Blade Warriors, which is a game I've never played. That's on PlayStation 2. We'll be trying that out. Tuesday night, we're going to start Ori and the Blind Forest. Played this a long time ago and really, really enjoyed it. A lot of great visual storytelling, fantastic art, great music. Really looking forward to playing Ori again. And then Wednesday afternoon, we will be playing The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion for Steam, continuing along with the Mages Guild side quests, and then we'll probably start the main quest. Well, we'll pick up the main quest where we left it off. Thursday, a week from today, what are we doing on the 24th? Oh, we have the List Critics. It's our other podcast, the List Critics Remastered. So basically, yeah, like I said, Thursday nights are sort of like a grab bag. We'll do the List Critics. I don't have a scene for it right now because we didn't want to do it on Halloween. So on Halloween, I'll probably play X-Men Legends. And then a week from Halloween on the 7th, we'll have the Council of Tolkien with Matt and Sid. And for those of you who wondered, by the way, because Sid lives in Florida, he was fine during the hurricane. He lost power for a little while, but he texted me afterwards. No, there's no connection to Stargate. It's just this really, really pretty game about this little sort of nymph-like creature exploring a forest after his caretaker starves to death. It's a really, really beautiful game that I enjoyed greatly the first time I played it. It's got this grand mythology behind it, but because it's completely told without words, everything has to be... there's some words, like in the narration at the very beginning, but all the storytelling throughout the game is mostly wordless, visual storytelling stuff. But anyway, guys, we're going to go ahead and do a raid. I don't know if I have another Tolkien streamer to raid. If Professor Corey Olsen is on, I'll raid him. But otherwise, it's probably just going to be somebody random. The sequel was even better. Ori and the Will of the Wisps, absolutely loved that game. I liked it even more. I see my friend Amethyst on. She is playing a game called Ominous, which I'm not familiar with. Oh, she's on her break? That's okay. She's only got 3 minutes. I always rate her on her break. She's only got 3 minutes, less than 3 minutes left on her break, so we're going to make her come back faster by rating her. She's got the Bluetooth thing set up. So thank you, everybody, for coming by. Let us do a raid message here. We'll do Fatty, don't do forests. Oh, how did the Yeet Wolf wind up in there? Oh, dear. Putka. All right, I'm cursing in Elvish.
All right, there is your raid call. If you just copy that, paste it as we head into Amethyst stream, she should be coming back from her break in 2.5. She'll come back right away once she hears the music. So we'll see you guys over there. We'll see you guys on Discord if you've joined it. We'll see you guys tomorrow for Chrono Cross. Been looking forward to jumping back into that. If you're here for Tolkien streams, the 7th, we will be doing the Council of Tolkien. Here we go.